My British Empire. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 226, Local Reform. Since the people who govern the place are their own people in each county, this will cause the authority of the central government to be weak, and the counties have no fear of London. Therefore, the government orders issued by the central government to the local governments are basically those that are beneficial or harmless to them, and various local committees will implement them, and if those decrees harm their interests, or are not conducive to the counties, they will choose not to implement them, or make superficial efforts at this time. The central government will send people to do the work to persuade them. If they are really unwilling to implement, the central government will generally not take any punishment measures. At most, the chairman of each committee will be removed from his post and replaced. However, as a community of interests, it can be done by removing one's job, and it's still the same if one person is replaced. A concrete example is the bourgeois revolution in England. Both the king and the parliament have local supporters. England is divided into two factions, and the local counties are divided into the parliamentary party and the king's party. Moreover, this also formed a kind of ethos, loving hometown. That's right, like the Chinese, they love their hometown, praise their hometown, and despise people from other regions. The development of this kind of atmosphere is not conducive to the unity of the country and causes the division of society. Therefore, in addition to the common law, all parts of England have their own laws, and they are also different. For example, public smoking is legal here, but not elsewhere. It has also affected the United States. Now the self-government of states in the United States is modeled after the United Kingdom, but Edward is really a person who likes power. Eager to fully grasp power, he is very uncomfortable with this situation where the local government is neither divorced from the central government nor controlled by the central government. Moreover, he was speechless about the situation in which various regions in the UK want to split in the future. The British have no concept of China's unification at all. For this reason, Edward felt that something should be done, otherwise even if he occupied the colony in the future, he would not be able to fully integrate into the UK. And in the end it would be inevitable that he would not be able to get rid of the loss. When I think about it, I finally occupied the Americas, immigrated, opened up wasteland, and open mines. I created a rich area with my own hands, but it broke away from my embrace and became another country, and even demolished my own pedestal. The aggrievedness of the British. Forget it. Thinking about it this way, on this day, he will no longer meet with other people. Instead, he will stay in his study wholeheartedly and begin to create a local system suitable for England. Throughout the night, Lucy changed the candles in the study one after another, and the drafts written by Edward accumulated layer after layer. Edward didn't feel very tired, but his head was a little groggy, as if he had been overused. Don't let anyone disturb me while I'm sleeping. Edward buried his face in the pillow, his voice hoarse. By the way, let me know the chairman of the Privy Council, Ferris Alexander, and tell me that I will hold an interim meeting of the Privy Council at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so that they can sit down and get ready. Squinting his eyes, Edward looked at Lucy's protruding figure, swallowed a mouthful of saliva, and said softly. Then, he closed his eyes and began to rest. Soon, His Excellency the Speaker of the Privy Council, who had been thinking about how to apply for the admission test, received such a notice. What is His Majesty the King going to do? This is really an incomprehensible thing. Ferris looked out of the window, and he felt that His Majesty the King was thinking like a wild horse. Although he was a little more gentle than Henry VIII, he was still more difficult to serve. Soon, adhering to the King's wishes, Ferris summoned several other important Privy Council ministers: the tall former Lord Keeper of the Seal Borman Randall, the former Justice Earl Robert with a silver-white wavy wig, the former Secretary of State Don Francis, and Kyle, who has been valued by the King in recent months' lands, together with Ferris Alexander, the chairman of the Privy Council. These few people constitute the core of the Privy Council. After the reform of the Privy Council, the Privy Seal Keeper was merged into the Privy Council. In addition to performing the duties of the Privy Seal Keeper, it also handled matters related to the royal family. The specific responsibility is the Official Position Management Department. The Secretary of State is also merged into the Privy Council, but his job is to replace the King, to monitor the Privy Council and record the actions and conversations of the ministers specifically responsible for supervising the Department of Management and communicating with the Circuit Court. The former Justice, Earl Robert, is in charge of legal and court affairs. serving as a bridge between the court and the Privy Council, specifically responsible for the Ministry of Religion and the Ministry of Social Security. Kyle Lance is in charge of the Department of Agriculture and Business Administration as the Speaker of the Privy Council. Ferris Alexander is responsible for the affairs of the three central departments, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Finance, and the Ministry of Construction Engineering. Each of the 9 central departments is in charge of a share. The chairman of the Privy Council manages the most important foreign affairs and finances, plus the less important construction department, which has sufficient leadership. This is also the general appearance of the Privy Council in Edward's mind. 5 people are enough, and the running in is not bad. As for the other Privy Council ministers, what should they do? It's not bad to be an idler. Let's make up the number, Your Majesty. Seeing the king coming in, the 5 people stood up and bowed in a respectful manner. Get up. Edward looked at the 5 people and nodded slightly. I called everyone here this time to tell you about my performance to you in the past few months. Upon hearing this, the 5 of them quickly sat up, with serious faces, and looked at Edward's youthful face without blinking. I have also seen the performance of everyone in the past few months, and you have done a good job. Edward's words relieved the tense hearts of the few of them. However, some departments in the central government are still wandering leisurely every day. I am not here for the elderly. As soon as Edward's words came out, the bodies of the 5 people all shook, their heads drooping slightly. Just when they were about to say something, Edward showed a smile, but continued, "It's not your fault. After all, most departments in the central government don't have anything to do, so why not hang around?" Only then did everyone let out a sigh of relief. Seeing the expressions of approval on the 5 people's faces, Edward nodded and his face became serious. "Your Majesty, it's not that we don't want to do things. It's just that some people in the local area don't strictly implement the orders of our central government, as if they didn't even hear them. They still go their own way and don't put London in their eyes at all." As the chairman of the Privy Council, Ferris rolled his eyes. He really deserved to be a bureaucrat for many years. He seemed to understand something and immediately began to cooperate and speak first. "This is not only a contempt for London, it is also a contempt for your Majesty." Chapter 227 Suspending Reform. I saw him standing up angrily. His eyes seemed to be bursting with anger. His mouth was opened wide when he spoke. His chin was raised high, and his 2 big black nostrils could almost be seen. Everyone was shocked by his anger for a while, and then everyone seemed to have a deep understanding, showing expressions of sudden realization. As the most important members of the Privy Council, how could they not know that some local governments resisted and delayed various central government orders? As the Speaker of the Privy Council, Ferris Alexander not only needs to send people to communicate with the local counties, but also writes and communicates non-stop every day. But in the face of His Majesty the King's reforms and government orders, he was like a mountain pressing down on him, forcing him to use more energy and triumphantly. Therefore, facing the duties of the king, Ferris's long-term irritability was thrown to the place, so as to reduce the pain in his heart. "Your Majesty, please deal severely with local officials who resist the central government." The more Ferris thought about it, the more angry he became. His face flushed, and he bent down and saluted Edward. "Your Majesty, Your Excellency, the Speaker is right. It should be dealt with." Then former Secretary of State Don Francis also swiped, stood up, and saluted Edward as the Minister of the Privy Council who communicated with the Circuit Court. Did he know how corrupt the place has been in the past 3 years? Edward inspected the 2 of them with his eyes, staying on their big sincere faces, with a pensive expression on their faces. "You are right. Since 1546, I have not intervened too much in the local area. Some people from major local committees have been in office for a long time. They've been sitting there for too long. I'm afraid that some counties have become their base, and they can't even pour water into them. They don't even care about my orders." Once Edward was reminded by them, he realized that since he took power, he has been busy with central reform and Scottish affairs, or it was the pilot project in London, and he really didn't have too many scruples about the locality except for the routine evacuation and changing of the sheriff every year. There is almost no intervention. The English have not felt the majesty of the royal family for a long time. During the period of Henry VIII and Henry VIII, one was the founding monarch, and the other used war and religious reform to shape the majesty of the king among the people. This is true in England, and even in Europe the king's prestige determines the king's power. Therefore, Edward originally saw that the reform of the central government was so smooth, so he decided to follow the example of Eduardo and make a local reform. Now it seems that he is still too naive. The central government is just the palm of the kings of the past dynasties, and he can change it as he wants. The local nobles and gentlemen don't care about it. As long as their interests are not offended, it has nothing to do with him, and if he carries out local reforms in spite of everything, the local resistance will be much stronger. I am afraid that this reform will only end in a premature end. Seeing this, Edward could only swallow the reform plan that Edward had held back all night. Therefore, in the eyes of Ferrus and others, the young His Majesty the King's face was a little red at this time, and there was an angry rhythm in this way. Ferrus and others couldn't help but feel happy. It seems that His Majesty the King has decided to clean up those who don't understand the rules. Your Majesty, the actions of the various counties are not only provoking our central government, but provoking you. Seeing such a situation, Ferrus didn't know the truth of striking while the iron is hot, and said hurriedly, if things go on like this, I'm afraid that the royal family's majesty in the local area will be destroyed. Ferrus looked at the king in front of him sincerely, with a hint of tremor in his words, showing the appearance of a loyal minister. Hearing what Ferrus said, Edward would not believe it all. The majesty of the Tudor royal family is not so easily destroyed. But it is not in line with Edward's intentions to be occupied by those gentlemen in this way. The whole of England can only have one ruler, and that is the King of England. The local gentry groups are usurping the king's rights, and if the king betrays their interests, they can always form a coalition of rebels against the king. For example, the Derby family in Lancashire, the Barnardiston family in Suffolk, and the Sheriff's Committee in the county are almost all members of their families. It can be said that half of the power in the county is firmly in the hands of their families. This means that what they say in the county is more useful than the king, just like a small family in the northern and southern dynasties. And Ferrus's behavior was not just out of righteous indignation, but the deep-seated word was right. The reform of the central power organization has made the Privy Council the most powerful department in the central government, and he has become an unprecedented one under one person in above 10,000 people. Even if he can only guide the affairs of the London area now, it is much better than he just revolved around the king as before. Once people experience the taste of power, they will be addicted to it and can't stop. Therefore, this time Ferrus smelled this breath, and immediately began to criticize the place without hesitation. Yes, Your Majesty, this is the greatest insult to you and the royal family. Several other people also realized that this is a good opportunity for them to expand their rights. Therefore, the few of them also looked at the young king with worry and anger, and they seemed to be erupting. However, the more they were like this, the more uneasy Edward felt. It was reasonable to think twice before doing anything. Seeing how sincere you are to the royal family, this is my biggest achievement today. Edward's brows were slightly flat, the corners of his mouth were slightly raised, and the smile on his face looked extremely happy. This is what we should do, Your Majesty. The five people exchanged eye contact. Ferrus suppressed the hunger in his heart, and led the others to bow down and salute. Very well, the royal family needs ministers like you. Edward nodded happily, as if he was moved by them. Lucy. Edward stared ahead, but called the maid outside the door soon. After a sound of light footsteps, Lucy stood in front of Edward in a lively manner. Your Majesty, Lucy said softly, go and get 5 Bibles. Edward ordered with a twitch of his mouth. Yes, Lucy nodded, and retreated slowly with doubts. But the 5 ministers were puzzled, wondering why they had to take the Bible at this time. Soon, 5 Bibles with exquisite and gorgeous covers were presented in front of the 5 people. This is my reward for your service to the royal family. Don't be surprised. Chapter 228 Circuit Court. Facing the surprised expressions of several people, Edward was calm in his heart, and his face was calm and indifferent. In the Middle Ages, as the only object to communicate with God, this created a different aura for it, and more importantly, its cost. The construction of each Bible requires hundreds of pieces of parchment, and the incorruptible transcription of a single word has laid the foundation for its considerable value. In aristocratic families with background, they will buy a Bible to enlighten their family members. More importantly, donating a beautiful Bible to churches and priests is also a good way to communicate. And it is also above board and impeccable. This, Ferrus slowly stretched out his hands to the exquisite Bible in front of him, but stopped when he was less than an inch away, and turned to the young king with a trace of exploration in his eyes. Seeing this, Edward nodded slightly with a faint smile. Soon, Ferrus picked up the tray of exquisite Bibles, eyes close on the cover. The Virgin Mary casts her beautiful eyes on the young son Jesus, who is playing with butterflies. His eyes are full of love and tenderness. The setting sun that falls in the curtain casts golden light in all directions, shining on the face of the Virgin, setting off the out of infinite maternal love. Soon, the 5 of them gently put down the Bible in their hands, as if it was a rare treasure, and their eyes were full of reluctance. Okay, this is your reward, go down. Edward waved his hand and said to the 5 people who were full of nostalgia. The 5 saluted with gratitude, and quickly left with the Bible in their hands. Emma, Inform Sir Adonis of the assize court that I will see him at 3 o'clock in the afternoon." After the others left, Edward gave instructions to Emma, the girl's secretary, who was also guarding the door after so many days of observation by Emma. Although His Majesty the King's tone today is calm, there is a special meaning in the piece no matter how many. Emma was puzzled, walked out of the room with 2 pairs of long and slender healthy legs, and ordered the other little secretaries to notify as a personal secretary. Emma is naturally the Secretary General, so such a small matter can't bother her. Edward thought about it alone, and suddenly, he stood up suddenly. It was more important to eat sitting on the chair. Edward slowly enjoyed the caviar in front of him, and from time to time dipped the green vegetables before eating, or ate a well-cooked veal steak, and his mood became more and more comfortable. But at this time, contrary to Edward's mood, Sir Angus Adonis, the chief judge of the circuit court, was in a bad mood at this time. European courts are basically walls that allow the wind to pass through. As long as you have money, you can get news, and so did the English court after Edward came to the throne. Although severe punishment measures were implemented, this atmosphere could not be completely changed after all. Like other courts, most of the court positions in England are held by noble ladies, and it is difficult not to disclose them. Therefore, before he was summoned, President Angus had already learned that after the king received the ministers of the Privy Council in the morning, he immediately summoned him. In this case, 9 times out of 10 it is bad news. Under the leadership of the maid, Angus walked step by step, but his mind kept churning, thinking about how to answer. Angus didn't have much impression of the young king. In the past 2 years, he was interviewed once a year to report on his work. The king sometimes raised doubts about those who were interested. Others have nothing to do with him, and they can't impress the king. The circuit court is actually a measure that England borrowed from the Frankish kingdom. The United Kingdom divided the country into 6 judicial districts, and set up 6 groups of 3 judges, requiring them to go to each judicial district for trial every year, which is also the origin of the word circuit. Tours are divided into 2 ways, the king's personal tour and the judge's tour. The circuit court can not only arraign civil lawsuits, but also arraign criminal cases, and even examine local officials and folk customs on behalf of the king. Of course, as the chief judge, Angus does not need to conduct tours across the country, but needs to summarize all the cases and records of the circuit court, and then report to the king. In other words, he does not have much right to serve as a bridge between the judge and the king. However, at ordinary times, he also carries the commission of the king, responsible for monitoring and examining circuit judges in various places. After a while, Angus was brought to the king's study room. Even though the curtains were drawn, the light was obviously dim, and the atmosphere in the room was gloomy and depressing. "Your Majesty." Angus immediately saw the thin king, bowed his head, and said respectfully, "Sir Adonis, don't be nervous, I just have a question for you." Edward saw Angus, who was stiff and stooped, with a calm face, and said in a friendly tone, "Yes, Your Majesty." Angus' shoulders trembled, and then he relaxed again, smiling all over his face to face the king's answer. "Okay, let's talk about it." Seeing this appearance, Edward stopped talking and asked questions directly. "Tell me what important cases were heard in the circuit court last year, or what important discoveries were made. Let's report it a month in advance. It won't trouble you, will it?" Edward sat on a chair covered with blankets, and said with a normal expression, "It's my honor, Your Majesty." Angus said with a serious face, his right hand touching his chest, and bending over. Afterwards, Angus selected several characteristic and interesting cases for illustration. His eloquence is very good. He talked about interesting cases as if he had personally experienced them, attracting attention, and even bleeding frequently, just like listening to storytelling. This made Edward recall the programs on TV in his previous life. After talking for nearly half an hour, even if it was about some cases, Edward didn't talk about what he cared about, but he didn't stop it. This kind of immediate sense of sight watching the show is very rare. "Okay, my sir." Edward took a breath, shook his head, and stopped him. Could it be that all the local officials did not make mistakes? As he said that, Edward's tone was serious, even gloomy. When Angus heard this sentence, a chill rushed to his brain, and he felt a little bad all over. "Your Majesty, I'm just summarizing this matter. I don't know the specifics." Although Angus was a little flustered in his heart, on the surface he looked innocent and ignorant, and he shied away without hesitation. It is true to say that, after all, he is not the specific person in charge, and he has been staying in London, so it is understandable to be deceived. Chapter 229 Clues. "Please forgive me, Your Majesty, after all, I don't have the right." Angus had a bitter face, spread his hands, and wrinkled his thick eyebrows. He licked his lips, as if he was in unspeakable pain. Edward's eyes were fixed, His lips curled up slightly, showing an appearance that everything was in the palm of his hand. Okay, Mr. Chief Judge, don't give me false words, this is just an excuse. Looking at the confident smile of the young king, Angus sighed in his heart. It was as expected, to be honest, although Angus Adonis has the honor of knighthood, in the face of the collusion between local gentlemen and judges, a small nobleman who is not a nobleman is not taken seriously by them at all. Therefore, facing the more in-depth question of the king, the bitterness in Angus' heart directly surfaced on his face. Sir Adonis, don't worry about anything. Everything you are facing is just a cloud. Edward seemed to think of something, and said something suddenly, with a confidence in his tone beyond words. This. Angus had a hesitant face and a hesitant tone. Okay, do they still dare to be rude to me? Huh? Edward said loudly, annoyed by Angus's hesitant character as the chief judge of the circuit court. Even if he often does secretarial work, he has some supervisory rights, so he must be clearer about the details below. Edward believes that if the local reforms are to be implemented smoothly, then it is necessary to teach the various local powers a lesson and reduce their prestige. When they realized that the royal power was still as strong all these years, they awakened the horrors of Henry VIII's time. At present, he does not have the same prestige as Henry VIII, and can only rely on power to enforce it if during this period, someone rebelled, or rioted. Those who feared the royal power would definitely observe it and would not act immediately. That is to say, the local gentry group will split, so that the guards with more than 5,000 people will not be afraid of them. Moreover, it can also let everyone in England know again, the young King of England is not jealous, Your Majesty, Angus thought in his heart. Since the king said so, if he hesitated, neither side would be pleased. It would be better to choose His Majesty, at least he would have a higher chance of winning. It is said that Mr. Felton John, one of the 3 major judges in the 1st District, recently bought a house in Oxford. Angus deliberated for a while, and said softly word by word N. Edward nodded slightly. I see. Slightly raising his head, he glanced sideways at His Majesty's thinking eyes. Angus was relieved to know that the delivery could finally be made. Your Majesty. Angus poked his head out and asked softly, I can retreat now, let's go. Let's go. Edward propped his head with his left hand, waved his right hand hastily, and said with some annoyance. Seeing this, Angus bowed lightly and left silently, but Edward was holding his forehead, thinking about the short clue given by Angus, and the corners of his mouth slowly turned up. Emma. Edward stood up suddenly and shouted towards the door. Yes, Your Majesty. Emma quickly pushed open the door, revealing a gleam of light, and even a cool breeze. Emma hurriedly opened the door and walked in, her breasts trembling uncontrollably, tormenting the tight blue dress. But how could their surge be blocked by small clothes? Therefore, with a ray of light outside the door, Edward could see the edge of the jade plate, tender and juicy, which was his only feeling. Go and call Jack, that Jack from the orphan army. Edward looked at Emma's fair and doubtful face, as well as the slow and gentle surge, and finally came back to his senses, moved a little, swallowed quietly, and then ordered yes. Your Majesty. Emma tilted her neck, glanced at His Majesty the King strangely, was puzzled by his strange behavior, thought for a while, twisted her slender waist, and left with ease. At this time, as the new Palace Intelligence Service, its working location was arranged in a side hall of the Whitehall Palace, which could even be said to be a somewhat desolate place. Seeing the working place like this, the Star Chamber Tribunal and the Blood Blade people who were transferred here before all showed expressions of being assigned, as if they were approved by the examination. However, they did not dare to directly refuse His Majesty's order, or even resign. I could only hold back the irritability in my heart, and started the arduous construction process under the leadership of a young man aged 16 or 17. In the end, the young man took them by surprise. Although His Majesty the King allocated a large amount of pounds, the rest was built by him by various means. In less than 4 months, he had a good grasp of the London area. This ability has to make them admire. Therefore, after having the support of the king and a strong leader, the rest of the people immediately felt at ease and devoted themselves to the Palace Intelligence Department. In this way, the entire Palace Intelligence Department was like a clockwork motor, and it started lively, and everyone was extremely energetic on this day. In the side hall, everyone was immersed in thinking or reviewing the information in their hands, but Jack, the leader of the Palace Intelligence Department, was called by the king. This made everyone's heart startled, their calm minds instantly became active, and their faces even turned red. Thinking about the work at hand indifferently, and the atmosphere of the whole studio is like boiling hot water, touching and exciting. The reward mechanism of the Palace Intelligence Service is the same as that of the Blood Blade, except that the base salary is a bit higher, but the basic salary is not as important as the task. With a task, there will be points, and there will be everything in the fantasy. Seeing this, everyone couldn't help praying in their hearts, hoping that the young leader would be able to receive a major task in front of the king. Just as they were praying, Director Jack of the Palace Intelligence Department, wearing moccasin boots and wearing a black fur coat, with a serious expression on his face and a strong majesty, walked in step by step. "What are you doing? Are you free?" Jack looked around, looking at the eyes that were shining with expectation, and said sharply yes. Seeing this, everyone dragged a long tail, and returned to their seats with slumped faces, unwilling to do so in this regard. Jack shook his head, walked into his office on his own, slumped on a chair, and took a deep breath. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 230, Secret Operation. With his eyes closed, Jack felt his head was a little dazed. Until now, he thought it was just His Majesty the King joking. At that time, under the leadership of the secretary, he came to the dark study room. His Majesty the King lowered his head and looked at the books in his hands solemnly. The air was particularly thick and exciting, Your Majesty. He stepped forward lightly, stroked his chest with his right hand, bent down to salute, hesitated for a while, and said N. Edward agreed without raising his head, and continued to stare at the book in his hand, as if this was everything. Seeing this, Jack could only raise his head, bend slightly, and stood aside, waiting quietly without saying a word. In this way, it was estimated that more than half an hour later, the king raised his head, as if he had just returned from the world in the book, with an unsatisfactory expression on his face. Your key cultivation kung fu has been practiced well recently. Very good. Just when he lowered his head to think about the meaning of the king, His Majesty's hoarse and deep voice came from his ears. Yes, Your Majesty. The more things you do, the better it will be. Without any hesitation, he lowered his head and said in a deep voice, Very well, I'm relieved to see your energetic spirit. He didn't see His Majesty the King's expression. He lowered his head, and he felt from his tone that this should mean satisfaction. This way, I'm relieved. Just when he was in doubt, he was called to the front, and after listening to His Majesty the King's speech, he understood what it meant. Dong dong dong. At this time, he was awakened by a knock on the door, and he came back from the memory in an instant, and choked out a sentence from his throat. Come in. There was a hint of annoyance in the voice, which made the visitor shiver. My lord. This is the big and small events that happened in London last month. A thin and flexible figure closed the door, showing black and yellow teeth, and said to Jack with a smile, Payne, put down the information and leave. What are you doing? Sneakily, I saw the thin and small figure didn't leave automatically after delivering the materials, but stood by the wall cheekily, rolling his eyes around, not knowing what he was doing. Regarding this, Jack was a little dumbfounded, so he could only keep a straight face and asked his partner, who was also from the orphan army, Hey. Payne licked his thick skin, walked up to Jack, and smirked. Aren't I being pushed by them to come to see you? Payne pointed at the people outside the door and sold them all without hesitation. You too. Everyone is curious about what Your Majesty called you to order. Payne straightened his expression and asked in a normal tone, This is related to everyone's interests, so I can only come in and ask with a cheeky face. Seeing this, Jack also calmed down, narrowed his eyes, and leaned back on the back of the chair, like a limp corpse. In detail, you don't need to know that much, just know that we really have an important task this time. Jack exhaled, his tone calm and indifferent. Haha, this is really happy. So I won't bother you. Payne laughed a few times, clapped his hands, and left the office like a wind. The door made a painful sound, and Jack shook his head with a wry smile. Soon, he heard a burst of cheers and the voice of Long Live His Majesty. His smile began to brighten, and he was able to satisfy his subordinates. He was qualified as a leader after being quiet outside for a while. Jack straightened his clothes, then got up from the chair, opened the door with heavy steps, and left the office. Everyone, His Majesty the King entrusted to me today. No, it is a very important task for us. This means that the King recognizes our recent performance. Everyone has worked hard these days. As soon as Jack came out, facing this tall and thin body, everyone was silent for a while, and he didn't care. He looked at the dozen or so people in front of him with blazing eyes, and said calmly and solemnly, seeing the leader who usually faces people coldly say dramatic words of thanks. Everyone was taken aback, and some even opened their mouths so wide that they could stuff a big goose egg. Seeing this, Jack said blankly. This time is our first and most important performance, which determines His Majesty's expectations of us, and also represents the first time we show our fangs in England. This mission must not be missed. Everyone, including me, must participate. Use all your energy and make no mistakes. Jack glanced at the crowd sharply, and saw that all of them looked serious, so he continued, okay, get ready, we'll talk about it tonight, and I'll tell you then. Well, everyone sighed in unison in their hearts, being tickled by his appetite. This feeling is really uncomfortable when everyone was working mechanically. Jack nodded in satisfaction and returned to his office. It's not that he didn't tell them. The main reason is that this task needs to be kept strictly confidential, and nothing should be revealed. After all, his opponents should not be underestimated. At 9 o'clock in the evening, the entire palace was almost completely dark, only in the side hall of the palace intelligence department. A few candles were extravagantly lit here, making it the only dimly lit place in the palace. Fortunately, other people are not ordinary people. They don't eat animal meat often, but they eat a lot of offal. They don't have night blindness. Only at the beginning of the 20th century, in the West, led by the wealthy elite, did the masses of the West resist eating animal offal, thinking it was dirty and filthy. However, how would they know that their ancestors had a history of eating offal comparable to that of the Chinese, and even ate more tricks than the Chinese? Everyone, our target this time is Felton John, the circuit judge currently residing in Oxfordshire. Jack sat at the head of the long table, with candles lit in front of him, and the dancing candlelight was active on his face from time to time, giving people an inexplicable confidence. This time I will lead the team and be in charge of the command. Let's act together and don't disturb the target without authorization. This is what I want to say. Jack scanned the faces of the crowd, and then focused on a thin piece of paper in front of him, on which were written Felton John's main deeds and family situation. He entrusted someone to get this from Bloodblade. After all, Bloodblade has been established for several years, so there are countless such materials. Act tonight, be fast, act according to my plan, and don't make any noise. We are a secret operation this time. Jack frowned and said sharply to everyone, yes, my lord. Everyone's eyes turned to this young and outrageous leader. They all stood up straight and shouted loudly. Chapter 231 Oxford. The crowd rode in carriages in batches and arrived at the gate of the city very quickly. The city gate officer, who had made a good relationship in advance, was condescending, and his fat head carefully looked at the 5 or 6 ordinary carriages below. After seeing the small red and white flags on the carriages, he waved back immediately. The long-awaited soldiers opened the gate with painstaking efforts, and a gap slowly appeared in the dark gate, which gradually widened. Seeing this, Jack waved down the exposed heads of the people in each carriage, and everyone relaxed, and the carriage also walked out of London. A few dim stars hung here and there in the pitch-black sky. Roars could be heard from time to time outside the empty city, and when the cold wind blew, everyone shivered. Seeing this, Jack's mood became more and more excited. This is a battle for him to decide his future, and there must be no mistakes in the slightest. Looking at the dark and inexplicable night road in front of him, Jack clenched his fists tightly and his gaze was firmer than ever. The eyes of other people are also looking forward, which represents the future and hope. Oxfordshire is part of the southern part of England. For us Chinese, the most famous university in the world is Oxford University, which together with Cambridge University has become the business card of the UK. This university, founded in 1509, was founded by the church and has been led by the church until now. In this regard, Edward does not currently have the energy to govern. Let the church lead for a few years. Oxfordshire is located in the Upper Thames Basin, covering an area of 2,608 square kilometers. It is surrounded by hills, with a wide valley basin in the middle, and the highest point is 260 meters above sea level. White Horse Hills. There are abundant coal resources, which is also one of Edward's main concerns, of course. More importantly, it is only 57 miles, about 92 kilometers, away from London, and it takes less than a day to reach London along the Thames River. Its territory is rich in water resources and its geographical location, the Thames and Cherwell rivers. These two rivers flow through Oxfordshire and irrigate 3/4 of the arable land in the county. The land is fertile and mainly produces wheat, barley, oats, sugar beet and fodder crops. In this current society dominated by agriculture, agriculture is developed, which means that the economy is developed, and people are naturally rich. Therefore, the church has a large amount of teaching property here, and Henry VIII accepted it without hesitation. A group of people traveled day and night, sitting on the transport ship under the royal family's property, and when everyone woke up in the next morning, they were only about 5 miles away from the city of Oxford in Oxfordshire. Let's go. Our goal has been reached." Standing on the bow of the boat, Jack said to everyone in high spirits soon, the horses and carriages that had been suffocated all night were unloaded from the transport ship. The crowd sat in the carriage, and within an hour, they arrived at the gate of the city where the crowd was scattered. 2 guards yawned and stood listlessly. If it wasn't for urging them to pay the city entrance tax and getting some oil and water from time to time, they wouldn't bother to watch it. From the perspective of Jack and others, although Oxford City is not as good as London, it is also a rare city in England. "Let's go in together later." With a more tired expression and an excited look, Jack turned his head. His face was serious, his eyes swept around the tired people behind him, and he said seriously, "Yes." Everyone's exhausted spirit was swept away immediately. Their faces became serious, and they all answered in a low voice. "Walk." Jack took the lead, approached the carriage, and directed everyone to unload the carriage, turning it into a flat cart. There are all kinds of goods on it, all wrapped in rags, and it doesn't seem to be worth much. The women's faces were covered with plaster, and they carried some small parcels on their backs. They were just playing the role of small merchants, but the guy with a strong figure and a ferocious face has transformed into a group of small mercenaries. Of course, Jack is not old enough to be the leader of a businessman, and a middle-aged man with shrewd eyes rolls around soon. A group of people drove slowly towards the city gate, getting closer to the city wall. At this time, the previously lazy soldier suddenly straightened up, holding a few portraits of human faces in his hands at some point, and they were drawn on precious and white paper from London. Jack, who had raised his head quietly at first, suddenly froze in his heart. And a trace of panic appeared on his bearded face in an instant. Could it be that someone in London reported it? And it's so generous, Jack thought silently in his heart, and an ominous premonition enveloped his whole body, making him feel a cold breath in his heart. Thinking in his heart, his pace also slowed down. Seeing this, the others also slowed down, and the speed of the entire caravan also slowed down. When he came back to his senses, he heard urging voices from the people behind him, and he also found that everyone's eyes were almost focused on him, with doubts and concerns in them. Seeing this, Jack let go of his thoughts, smiled at everyone and shook his head gently, indicating that he was fine. The speed of the entire team also returned to normal, and it was their turn. After passing the several teams ahead. "Stop!" The tall man among the 2 guards suddenly stopped the tax-collected caravan with his hands. His eyes were piercing, his nose sniffed vigorously, and there was an inexplicable smile on the corner of his mouth, as if he had caught a big fish. "Generally everyone is standing in front of me. I want to check." With his head held high, the tall guard raised his voice and said, while the corners of the other guard's mouth, which looked dry and thin, were also greatly split. And he looked extremely happy. Everyone's faces changed, and their bodies stiffened one after another, but their right hands stretched out to the sharp sword under their clothes. But Jack suppressed the panic in his heart, and shook his head gently at the crowd with a calm face, and the hands of the crowd returned to their original state. Soon, the 2 guards took the few portraits in their hands, and walked step by step to a dozen people standing in a row, comparing the portraits in their hands with smiles on their faces. The speed of the comparison was very fast. In less than 2 minutes, half of the people had been checked, and the faces of the 2 people who were originally full of smiles became more and more bitter. Just like that, everyone was checked twice and also not found during the period. Jack glanced at the portraits in their hands, and one of them was 70% similar to himself. Of course, he couldn't recognize him with such a dirty and worn-out face. Everyone packed their bags, settled their minds, walked through the city gate without haste, and came to the city of Oxford. According to the usual practice, a group of people came to a relatively simple warehouse, which can let them rest and store goods. When he came to the warehouse, Jack, who was walking in the back section, glanced sideways and found a person who seemed to be following him, with a sneer on the corner of his mouth. Chapter 232, Oxford. The enthusiastic boss saw a group of more than a dozen people and 3 large carriages, and immediately greeted them with a smile on his face. All kinds of hot food and water were put out, and he quickly ordered the staff to clean up the guest room. As for the 3 big horses, they were also taken to the stable by the staff, and they took out dried hay and ate it with the horses. Seeing this, as the person in charge of the caravan, Pim, who was always tactful, suddenly came to his senses, and asked the busy boss, "Boss, are there not many caravans like the one used by Oxford?" The boss who was directing came to his senses, turned his head and smiled obsequiously, and said softly, "It's winter, and the grain harvest season has already passed, so why are there any caravans coming?" With that said, the boss came closer and continued to be honest. "You are the biggest caravan I have stayed in this month." Seeing the smiling boss, everyone was speechless for a moment. No wonder the guards would check them out. It turned out that this was the biggest reason. Regarding this, although Jack was expressionless and indifferent, he felt ashamed in his heart. Which was too embarrassing after a lot of work. Everyone had breakfast, packed up, and as if they had discussed it, they all gathered in the room of Pim, the nominal leader of the caravan. Everyone must have been very impressed with the moment at the city gate, and some people can see it very clearly. They must all know who the portrait above is. Jack sat on the main seat without hesitation. His face was solemn, his eyes looked at the people around him, and his voice was low. After finishing speaking, everyone nodded their heads, and their faces became serious. All eyes focused on the young leader, wanting to see what he thought. After that, on the way to the inn, I saw a few figures sneaking behind us. I think they haven't given up on our investigation yet. Jack also found that everyone looked like this, which he had always expected and enjoyed. That is to say, our origin has been leaked. I'm afraid someone will be discovered when we first left London. Everyone, this is not good news. Everyone's task is becoming more and more difficult. As soon as Jack finished speaking, everyone was stunned for a while, and their faces were ugly. This form of knowing the enemy and secretly raised the difficulty to a lot. Moreover, this also shows that there is a high possibility that there is an internal traitor between them. This kind of internal and external difficulties is very annoying. Seeing everyone's defense against each other, Jack immediately said solemnly, "Everyone must believe in their companions. There is no possibility of any traitor between us. Here, we can only rely on ourselves." Speaking, Jack pointed to the ground under his feet. As soon as the words were finished, everyone breathed a sigh of relief, and their vigilance gradually faded away. However, this incident put a thorn in their hearts at this time. In a mansion in Oxford, a strong man was sitting on a cushion stuffed with woolen cloth. His eyes were shifting, listening to the report of a slender and thin man in front of him. "My lord, according to our investigation, the caravan that came to Oxfordshire today is the person you are looking for." The thin man bent over and said respectfully to the man sitting on the chair N. The man nodded lightly. "You guys did a good job this time. Butler, give him £10. The man turned his head and ordered to the middle-aged butler who was standing by, and then turned his gaze to the thin man in front of him. "This is a reward for you. I hope your guild will continue to satisfy me next time. As long as you give us a satisfactory remuneration, we will definitely satisfy you, and hope to serve you again next time." With that said, the thin man slowly backed to the door, bowed and saluted, then turned and closed the door. The face of the man sitting on the chair suddenly wrinkled, revealing a troubled look. "Master, do you want to send someone to give them to?" The butler at the side bent down, showing his snow-white teeth, and made a neck-cutting motion. "No." The man raised his right hand, denying the suggestion. "It's the best way to keep them under my watch." A bitterness suddenly appeared on the man's face. "Besides, they are His Majesty's people. If something happens, I will be the first to be suspected, and I will have no good fruit. The end will be the same." Felton John's bitter smile made his butler swallow his persuasion, and he could only respond in silence. In the middle of last night, he suddenly received several portraits and a piece of surprising news. His Majesty the King sent a team to Oxford to investigate him. This made him lose all drowsiness in an instant, and his whole body broke out in a cold sweat, which made him terrified. He couldn't help but not be worried. In less than 3 years as a circuit judge, he had already bought a luxury house in Oxford, owned 5 shops in a prosperous area, and even added 200 acres of land. But you must know that he was only the son of a lawyer at that time, so how could he have so much financial resources? Besides, his cheap old man was not dead yet, and he had no inheritance to inherit. Isn't this obvious? Corruption is not terrible. What is terrible is that those who cooperate do not want him to confess. Therefore, he must let the king's people get nothing, or sooner or later, he will be silenced. The benefits, huge benefits, are enough for them to buy themselves a twisted rope. As for who sent the letter, he couldn't care any more. He would rather believe in something than nothing. That's why the portraits of Jack and others were sent to the guards and searched. Felton John, who came back to his senses, rubbed the curly hair on his head. At this time, a small farewell party was being held in London, the residence of the Duke of Norfolk. The protagonists who were sent off were Russell, who stayed in the Duke's mansion for several days, and the fat businessman Darren. The Duke of Norfolk, who was in his 70s this year, rarely walked to the side door, showed a gentle smile, and waved to the two who were about to board the carriage. For this, Russell and fatty Darren showed a look of honor, imitating the etiquette of the English, taking off their hats and bowing down to salute. After the carriage of the two of them disappeared in front of the Lord Duke, the Duke of Norfolk restrained his smile, and returned to his room with the gentle support of the silver-haired butler. "Has the letter been delivered?" His Excellency. The Duke's voice was a little hoarse, but he looked straight ahead, walked slowly and vigorously, and refused the butler's support. The silver-haired butler smiled helplessly, and said softly, "It has been delivered, and I also gave him a few portraits. I hope they can escape." The corners of the Duke's mouth curled up, and he sneered, "Looking at how they eat, we will have to waste our efforts in the end. Then you still, anyway, it is a matter of benefit and no cost. Why not find something for our king to do?" Chapter 233 Oxford. He was talking, but His Excellency the Duke was very fast, and within a while, he came to the study. The butler took a quick step, pulled away the cushioned chair, and helped the Duke to sit down. Although the Duke is old, he still sits upright according to noble etiquette, and his whole person looks full of noble style and elegance. With a straight face, the Duke of Norfolk has always considered himself the guardian of the orthodox nobles, and has always followed the etiquette among the nobles. Even in private, His Excellency the Duke's character has always been stubborn, especially in his later years. He became more and more firm in his originally indifferent Catholic belief. Moreover, he also felt a kind of shame from the bottom of his heart for cooperating with Henry VIII's blasphemy of Catholicism for the sake of power when he was young. I am afraid that it is also because of his approaching death. Anyone will have fear of death. Therefore, this is also the feeling he gained in the later period, after losing his son who was killed in the rebellion and being pushed out of the center of power in England for his own beliefs. He propped up his body in his 70s, committed to restoring the original tradition of England, so that he could return to the embrace of God after his death. Sir, I think this Mr. Russell will give me a little surprise. The silver-haired butler bent down, looked at the exquisite Bible in the Duke's hand, and said softly, "I hope." His Excellency the Duke was expressionless. His eyes were focused on the cover inlaid with rubies, his lips moved, his voice flickered, and if the butler wasn't relatively close, he really didn't know what he said regarding this. The housekeeper also held his breath, bent slightly, and stood aside, waiting for the Duke's order. By this time, Jack had already been in the inn for a day. Of course, as the leader of the caravan, Pym had already left the inn with a few strong guards to find buyers and the purchased goods. The consignment was nothing but Bibles and immaculate paper, a luxury favored by the upper echelons of Oxford. The Palace Intelligence Office pretends to be a caravan, so at least it needs to be professional. So all the goods needed will be brought in from the inner court, and the principal will be returned later. This can also be regarded as earning income for the Palace Intelligence Office. During the day, Pym took some of his so-called subordinates to do business. No, they went looking for business, while Jack and the others took a bag of silver coins, that is, shillings, to wander around the streets of Oxford. Winter, this slack period, is always the time when all kinds of wine business in Oxford City is booming. Yeomen and craftsmen who have some spare money in their hands invite them together in groups of 5 or 6, drinking and bragging. Don't mention the days how beautiful. Therefore, even in the evening, there are a lot of drunkards walking staggeringly on the street, arguing with red faces, and the pedestrians on the road have already seen it, and are even commenting on who might be the winner at this time. A young man passed by in a hurry, and accidentally bumped into one of the drunkards, causing the man to yell, and all kinds of swear words came out of his mouth. Even the pedestrians on the side of the road could hardly hear him. Bear, of course, the young man couldn't stand it. He raised his fist and smashed it. The two wrestled into a brawl immediately, but the others didn't have the slightest intention of persuading the fight. They formed a ball like watching a juggler, cheering loudly from time to time. Jack also stood far away, arms crossed, watching with great interest. But at this time, a thin man in a black short shirt was walking through the crowd step by step. His steps were slow and steady, as if he just wanted to change his position. But the sharp-eyed Jack stared intently. He seemed to have discovered something, and a smile with a different meaning appeared on the corner of his mouth. If you look carefully, you will find that every time the man takes a step, he will come near a person, shake his right hand, and take out a few shiny silver shillings or half-worn pennies from a pocket. After picking out 5 or 6 people, the man with nimble legs quickly left the crowd, pretending to be indifferent, and left. Jack leaned against the wall, watched the thief's movements with interest, and followed him casually when he left. After following for a certain distance, the man seemed to have noticed that someone was behind him, and the movements of his feet became faster and faster. Seeing this, Jack also speeded up to follow, turning several turns in a short time. Looking at the blocked road ahead, he knew he had been fooled. He lowered his head, his face was cloudy and uncertain, and he didn't know what he was thinking about. This is, as expected, footsteps came from the exit. Jack slowly raised his head, and saw the original thief man walking over with a few men of the same size, with a grin grinning. "Hey, buddy, do you know that you've got yourself in trouble, and we, the Holmes gang, won't show mercy to someone like you." The leading thief man shook his long toe pair full of filth, said tuggingly, and looked at him with a mischievous face. "Don't get me wrong, I'm just looking for your boss." Jack calmed down and said with a smile, "If I wanted to trouble you, I would have exposed you in the crowd." "Oh," the thief man said with a smile to the people around him, "so you're still a Cockney." The thief man shook the big wooden stick in his hand, getting closer and closer to him, but he could only retreat step by step until it reached the wall. "For the sake of not doing anything wrong just now, I will spare your life." The thief man stretched his head, showed a fierce smile, and said directly, "Come with me. After meeting our boss, I hope you can have a good explanation so you can get away with it." After the thief man left a word, he turned around and led the way. This made Jack, who was ready to fight back at any time, couldn't help but relax. He calmed down and followed the other two scrawny men walked around behind him without saying anything, staring at him, as if he did something he shouldn't do, they would beat him hard with a big wooden stick in his hand. After walking around 7 times and 8 times, after passing through more than a dozen alleys, I came to an unremarkable courtyard, which is innumerable in the city of Oxford. In front of a broken door, a man who looked stronger than others was watching them, shaking his head. When he saw them coming, he just gave Jack a strange look and stopped talking. Jack followed the thief man to the back room, but this time there were 2 people watching at the door with expressionless faces. "There's a Cockney guy who wants to see the boss, so go and report it." The thief man shook his long gray-brown hair, walked over, and said respectfully, "Wait." One of them glanced at Jack's sturdy figure and nodded in agreement. Chapter 234 Holmes' Gang. Afterwards, Jack was invited in, and when he looked up, he saw this mysterious boss. I saw a man sitting by a large wooden table, about 27 or 8 years old, with short to medium-length hair. The neckline of a gray shirt was slightly open, and the cuffs of the shirt were rolled up to the middle of the arms, exposing the wheat-dark skin, deep eyes, high nose bridge, chapped lips. He was not covered in filth and shabby sackcloth like everyone else, and acted like a gentleman from Jack's point of view. If this man was born in an aristocratic family, he must be a man of the hour in London. The ladies will be fascinated by him, and the jealousy of the nobles will definitely be like a fire. "Hello, my name is Holmes. You can also call me Grey Wolf. This is my nickname." Looking at this handsome face with a slight smile, Jack had a feeling of facing the Alexander Knight, and he even felt a little jealous in his heart. "Hello, my name is Leon, from London," facing this handsome gangster boss. Jack also smiled kindly, bowed his waist and said, "Tell me, Londoner, what is the purpose of your coming to me? My time is precious. If you don't satisfy me, I'm afraid you will be in danger." At this time, the handsome face revealed a hint of ruthlessness, matching his slight smile, which made Jack tremble involuntarily. He quickly calmed down, and said with a smile on his face, "Mr. Holmes, I am here this time to bring a lucrative mission." "Oh? This is really a happy thing." Holmes frowned, and his smile became brighter. "Sit down. Mr. Leon, I don't know if there's anything you need us to do, just say it. In the whole city of Oxford, there's nothing that we, the Holmes gang, can't do. You can find us, you are so brilliant." Holmes turned around and said to Jack, speaking in a big way, as if the whole city of Oxford belonged to him, full of confidence. Seeing this, Jack didn't say anything. He still knew about the situation in Oxford. The thieves in the entire Oxford city are led by this handsome man in front of him. It can be said that although his Holmes gang is the largest gang in Oxford, its combat effectiveness is only second-rate. It is nothing more than a well-informed fact that some big shots have asked him for help. Therefore, the gang with the largest number of people can only survive under the compromise of all parties, and it is inseparable from this boss who is so rich. Mr. Holmes, although this task is very beneficial, I'm afraid you won't dare to do it." At this time, Jack held the initiative, sitting on the chair, speaking in a calm tone. "Mr. Liang, you don't need." As soon as he said it, Holmes said anxiously, and then saw some of his subordinates acting as if they were eavesdropping, and immediately turned around and scolded them. "What are you listening to? Go down." After a group of subordinates left reluctantly, they turned their heads and said kindly, "You don't need to worry about anything. With the strength of our Holmes gang, as long as I'm in Oxford, I can do it." Of course, as long as you pay the right price, anything can be done. Holmes' handsome face revealed an extremely greedy look, forming a great contrast, which made Jack feel pity. "So, how do I need to pay for your hard work?" Jack shook his head in his heart, looked at the greedy boss, and asked. "The term hard work is used well. We really only earn hard work, so you only need to pay half of the hard work first, and you can pay the rest after you finish." Holmes looked at the suspicious eyes of the young man in front of him, and explained directly, "Don't worry, since my father's generation, the reputation of our Holmes gang has always been praised by people in Oxford, and we will never be ambiguous. Your money, after all, this is what we eat, okay? If you finish this, I'll give you £100. Jack looked at his boastful expression suspiciously, but he knew in his heart that the investigation also showed that the Holmes gang had a good reputation among gangs, and with their current surveillance situation, they could only be trusted. "You made a wise choice, Mr. Leon. Tell me, what do you need us to do?" Upon hearing such a large number, Holmes narrowed his eyes and couldn't close his mouth. "In addition, in order to express a direct sincerity, I will give you a piece of news for free. When you arrived in Oxford, His Excellency Judge Felton John has already let us pay attention to you." After finishing speaking, Holmes looked at the client with great interest and made an appreciative expression. "Oh, then thank you for the news." Jack pretended to be indifferent, and thanked him directly, but he murmured in his heart, "It seems that there are still people who tell the truth. Come here with your ears." Jack calmed down and waved to Holmes, and Holmes didn't doubt that he was there, so he went directly to his ears and listened carefully. "You just need to do this." Jack looked around and ordered in a deep and powerful voice. After finishing speaking, Holmes stared wide-eyed, with a surprised expression on his handsome face. "Why, don't you dare?" Jack sneered, with a mocking expression on his face, which made Holmes extremely angry. The expression on his face was solemn, and he said coldly, "The price is too low. But there is no escape." Although he knew in his heart that the consequences of this mission would be serious, Holmes, who was greedy for money by nature, was so tickled by the £100 that he didn't care about the consequences. What's more, with this £100, England can't go anywhere. At that time, bring some savings, buy a few dozen acres of land in the countryside, and enjoy the blessings. The danger of being a gangster is too great. He has witnessed his own demise. Father Holmes Sr. was directly hacked to death with a knife. However, he felt that he was not doing enough and needed to earn a little more. "The price you gave doesn't match it," Holmes said with a straight face. "Okay, £150. This is the most, otherwise forget it." Jack made a gesture of leaving, and was held down by Holmes before he said helplessly 3 days later, "As long as 3 days, no, I will personally deliver the things to you." With a firm gaze, Holmes stated the time directly. "Okay, I'll be waiting for you, Mr. Holmes. If you want to run away, I can help you too." Jack was also bold and said directly, "This is the deposit." Throwing down the jingling purse, Jack walked out of the room gracefully. Chapter 235. Returning in vain. On the second day, there was a dense drizzle in Oxford City, which soaked the already dilapidated roads in Oxford City. All kinds of dirt and garbage were washed and piled up by the rain, forming small obstacles on the road, and the pedestrians on the road walked by without seeing it. Obviously, they were used to it, and it even became a part of their life. Seeing this, Jack and the others could only hold their noses, walk around the streets, and spend a lot of energy and money to find out the news they needed in Oxfordshire regarding today's request. Jack kept a straight face and told them that they must inquire about the specific information of Judge Felton. After all, the information on paper is too superficial. Only by referring to more information can we understand Felton John. Three-dimensionally, justice in the city of Oxford. Every tavern and hotel is full of people from the Palace Intelligence Department, and everyone is interspersed with them, with no distractions, ears pricked up, listening to all kinds of gossip. Often, these words that slip out accidentally are what they need. Therefore, everyone can only be patient and carefully screen the news they need at this time. Jack, as the commander-in-chief, was naturally not idle, and he needed a more powerful force. As I said before, 2 rivers in Oxfordshire flow through and irrigate a lot of farmland in the 16th century, even in Europe at that time. There was no fertilizer for agricultural production, most of the production tools were made of wood and stone, and there were no water conservancy projects. In addition, due to the lack of physical strength of farmers, there were good irrigation conditions. This is England's first-class farmland. Therefore, Oxfordshire has attracted the attention of the Church of England, which owns a large number of church properties here, accounting for almost 3/4, all of which are cheaper than the Tudor royal family. And here, the power of the royal family is the strongest. With such a good help, why not use it? In fact, relying on Felton John's corruption charges alone would be enough to bring him to justice, but Jack did not do so. If this is done, at most one judge will be appointed, and it will not show the prestige of the Palace Intelligence Service to the English at all. Don't underestimate the prestige. With a major case that shocked England, It will be much more convenient for the Palace Intelligence Department to act in England. What's more, according to Jack's own estimation, His Majesty the King also has expectations for his handling of this incident. A small judge corruption case is not enough to satisfy the King's appetite for his own future, and for his impression on His Majesty the King, Jack could only resort to any means. Wearing a black tall hat and a black fox fur coat, like a low-key business owner, Jack walked silently without attracting the attention of others. This time he was going to a white residence near the Oxford City Hall, where a family of lawyers lived, and this was a secret stronghold of Bloodblade, and it was also a former investigation office of the royal family for Oxford. The kings of all dynasties also valued it very much, and it is common for some people to be placed there in order to support the development of the Palace Intelligence Division. Edward transferred some of Bloodblade's hidden strongholds in various places to the Palace Intelligence Division, and Guy could only nod in agreement. So, here's where Jack's trip came and the journey went smoothly, and he reached his goal smoothly. The person in charge of the stronghold patted his chest and promised to collect all the people and information related to Felton John. Please rest assured in this regard. Jack also smiled with satisfaction and praised them a few words, and then left the stronghold. After walking out of the gate, Jack put away his smile and showed a serious expression on his face. He is 100% sure that this stronghold has been exposed, and it can even be said that there are moles planted by others. In less than a day, the news of his arrival in Oxford will definitely spread throughout the city of Oxford. With such an analysis, Jack also has a reason. When he walked into the room, the people in the stronghold all had a well-thought-out expression, and more importantly, they were delaying the cooperation he asked for one by one, with all kinds of explanations filing their mouths. No words, and if you still believe that they will help you, then you don't know when you will have to wait. Jack's heart became colder and colder. This force is too powerful. Even the stronghold of Bloodblade has penetrated. The water in Oxford City is really deep. Since they came to Oxford, they have been caught and watched, and their every move is probably in the eyes of others, as if they are acting. Shaking his head with a wry smile, Jack's expression became serious. This kind of difficulty cannot make him succumb. With a sigh of relief, Jack regained his confident expression and felt refreshed. Strolling on the streets of Oxford, Jack rarely relaxes for a while, and prepares to enjoy the beautiful scenery of Oxford carefully. After a few glances, he can only shake his head and choose to give up. Oxford is still the same as other English cities. Although the city is small, it has a population of several thousand. All kinds of garbage and filth are scattered all over the streets and alleys, making the narrow streets even narrower. This makes him, who is used to the cleanliness of London, erase the appreciation of the mind when he felt a little anxious. A group of people also started to tremble with fear on the outskirts of Oxford. A large-scale mansion covers an area of 200 acres. All kinds of flowers and expensive trees are everywhere, and the eaves, doors and windows are carved with exquisite patterns. When you go in, you can see the splendor of all kinds of artworks and gold ornaments. It can be said that this residence is even more gorgeous than Edward's palace. This is the Delphi Palace, the location of the palace of the sun god Apollo in Greek mythology, built by Sir Parker Matthew of Oxfordshire, which spent a lot of money, showing the huge financial resources of the Matthew family. Unlike China, Western kings have no requirements for private residences and other buildings. Therefore, as long as you have money, you can build a palace that is even more magnificent than the royal palace. You can even name it at will, and the king has no control over it. From this aspect, it can be seen that the degree of decline of Western royal power is not the same as that of Chinese emperors, and there are strict regulations on basic necessities of life. The gorgeous palaces built by private individuals are often captured or bought by the king. After all, this is the most convenient way, and there is no need to wait so long. For example, the Hampton Palace on the banks of the Thames, which is said to be comparable to the Palace of Versailles in France, was taken by Henry VIII from a bishop named Worthy. As for where will he live in the future? Of course, it is a prison, and they can willingly sacrifice for any crime of blasphemy against the king. If it is in a local area, it is much safer. At least His Majesty the King does not have an intuitive understanding, so, following the great wealth of the Age of Discovery, batches of exquisite castles and residences emerged in various places during the Tudor period. Chapter 236 Four Families. The resplendent Delphi Palace made every guest who came here couldn't help being amazed. They were sincerely envious of the wealth of the Matthew family, and couldn't help but feel some sour water in their hearts. But if they are asked to build one, they can only shake their heads with wry smiles. With more than enough energy, in order to build this exquisite Delphi Palace, the Matthew family spent 2 generations, 44 years, and spent a huge figure of £50,000 as expenditure, which is not so amazing for ordinary families' wealth. Therefore, although there were rumors that the Matthew family was all fools, Sir Matthew didn't care. He knew that this palace not only brought great honor to the Matthew family in Oxfordshire, but also brought great honor to the Matthew family. There are huge indirect benefits. We know that the advent of the Age of Discovery and the Reformation quietly changed England's traditional moral standards. People's desire for wealth has reached a perverted level, and even the evaluation of a family and an individual is no longer his knowledge and cultivation, but his wealth. Therefore, since owning the famous Delphi Palace in Oxfordshire, the prestige of the Matthew family has skyrocketed, and in England, with prestige, everything is possible. With the help of prestige, the Matthew family had a seat in the Oxford Magistrates' Committee. Later, with the help of power, he united with other families to enclose the land wantonly. The Matthew family became one of the best big families in Oxfordshire, and their influence became more and more powerful. Huge. But at this time, in the Delphi Palace, a group of gentlemen who were regarded as superior in the eyes of the common people were frowning the contemporary Sir Matthew Parker. Matthew is only in his early 30s, with wavy long black hair, a high nose bridge, and deep eye sockets. His whole person reveals a refined temperament. At the same time, sitting together were the patriarchs of the other three major families, began Thomas, Chabas Owen, and Brill John. Everyone sat together with serious expressions, but the atmosphere in the room seemed low and dignified. Tell me what to do with this young man from London. As a young man, Charles Owen, who was only 20 years old, felt a little aggrieved by the dreary atmosphere, and couldn't help asking. Seeing this, the others also turned their gazes to Brill John, who was in contemplation. This bald old man in his 50s, the beard on his chin was well combed, and his eyes were deep and calm, as if it was a small piece of work. Things are normal. The John family is the most powerful family among the four families present, and Brill John has always been known for his wisdom, so everyone turned their attention to him instead of Sir Matthew, the owner of Delphi Palace. In this regard, Sir Matthew has no complaints. As a new family, it is still small compared to the John family, which has been around for hundreds of years. Don't worry, at present he is only active under our noses. He has been under our surveillance, and they won't get any powerful news. Brill John paused for a moment, glanced at the eager crowd, took a breath, and continued, besides, he's here this time mainly to deal with Justice Felton John, so what does it have to do with us? Speaking of Felton John, Brill showed a contemptuous smile and said sentence by sentence, my sir, that greedy fellow knows our situation very well, and I'm afraid he, began Thomas, who had blonde curly hair, looked at Brill's indifferent expression, and said directly, with a hint of blame in his tone. Brill smiled lightly as if hearing some joke, shook his head, and asked directly, Mr. Thomas, don't we go down first? Don't let that greedy idiot be killed by others? Arrest, you mean? Asked Sir Matthew in a tone of surprise. The faces of the others were roughly the same, full of surprise and puzzlement. You know, if a circuit judge is killed, the consequences will be much more serious. This is a direct challenge to the majesty of the king, so that no one can escape seeing the terrified expressions on their faces. Brill could only sigh in his heart, pretending to sigh, and continued to explain, in this world, there are countless ways to die. For example, our Lord Judge has it would be a pity if you accidentally fell down the stairs. As he spoke, Brill didn't show a trace of regret on his face, but instead smiled, looking so happy. Hearing such an explanation, the others also smiled, and the atmosphere in the air suddenly became much happier for Felton John, an insatiable guy. It was really unbearable for everyone. He was cutting the fat of everyone's mouths again and again. This kind of thing involving profit completely exhausted everyone's patience. This matter has to start from the circle. The so-called enclosure refers to the aristocrats and gentlemen turning the originally public land into their private land by riding horses and laying wooden stakes. Ancient England was in a primitive mode, in which in the countryside all land, except private land, was communal and belonged to all the villagers. The enclosure movement is that the nobles and gentlemen rode horses, laid wooden stakes, and drove away the farmers who were farming on the public land, so that the public land became the private. Just like the land in our Chinese countryside, all the land belongs to the collective. But at this time, if some bullies allocate all the land as their own private, this kind of behavior is not tolerated by the government, and it was also in the Tudor dynasty in this way in the 150 years after 1488. The Tudor government issued at least 11 Acts of Parliament and 8 inquiry reports to ease the enclosure movement. However, the effect is not obvious. For example, in Oxfordshire, from 1547 to the present 1550, At least 10,000 acres of land were enclosed in this regard. The Tudor royal family specially set up an anti-enclosure committee, stipulating that some enclosure behaviors are illegal, and half of the enclosure proceeds need to be paid to the royal family. As for the anti-rouage committee, which gradually became marginalized with the loss of power of Thomas Wolsey, the circuit judges took up this task at this time. In this regard, the four major families joined hands to bribe Felton John. But Felton John was insatiable and asked again and again. The accumulated amount reached £2,000, which was almost 1/10 of the income from the enclosure up in a few days ago. He also asked the four major families for 100 acres of fertile land. It seemed that he also knew that he was going too far and threatened them. How could the four major families be satisfied with him? If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelists. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 237, New Target. Tell me, what do you gain? It was near evening, but the afterglow of the sun did not give the room any brightness at all. Two torches stood around the room, swaying, just like everyone's mood. Tired and worried as the leader, Jack couldn't see a trace of exhaustion on his face. It was still the original stereotype of everyone. He seemed to have everything in mind and didn't care about everyone's current plight. The whole person sat upright on the chair, motionless as a mountain, like a statue, calming everyone's turbulent mind instantly. Even the leader didn't worry. What are you worried about as a soldier? What are you doing, boss? When you came back just now, we had already discussed the use and got a few clues. As Jack's friend, although Payne is thin and small, he is smart and tactful, so he stood up, looked at the young leader in front of him, lowered his head slightly, and said in a low voice, "First, Lord Circuit Judge Felton John currently owns 2 villas and 3 shops in Oxford, and a small estate of more than 100 acres in the suburbs. The total value has reached about £1,500. Wealth has multiplied tenfold. People are talking about it, and their dissatisfaction is palpable. Secondly, the judge's wife is from a commoner background. She usually just goes shopping and enjoys life leisurely at home. He has a son and a daughter. The boy is 10 years old and the girl is 6 years old. They are very smart. However, according to our careful investigation, this Lord Justice also has a beautiful mistress at Oxford, and has a 1-year-old boy. Thirdly, the judge's usual performance is not bad, and he has a high prestige for his subordinates, servants and Jan Ruiz. Although everyone was amazed by his wealth, there was no dissatisfaction, and even envy. Fourth, we have confirmed that he has colluded with local gentlemen for interests. As long as we investigate in this direction, we will definitely gain something." Payne's eyes were indifferent, without any hesitation, and his tone was unhurried, and he spoke fluently in line with his authentic London accent. The others also focused their eyes on him. Even though they already knew the specific situation, they still listened carefully without blinking their eyelids. Among them, the last proposal is also what they want to say. At present, they can only investigate Felton John for corruption. Although at most he will be removed from office and bring a little compensation, but at least it can be regarded as a task completed. Therefore, everyone's eyes turned to the young leader, who closed his eyes and thought, looking forward to his order and, "Well done. This is indeed a very good piece of information. You have performed very well." Jack felt a little amused when he noticed the focused gazes of the crowd, but he unexpectedly smiled and praised them indifferently. In this regard, the corners of everyone's mouths were slightly raised. It is very rare to be able to find out so much information in such a short time. Besides, it is very rare to be praised by Iron Jack. "Let's go down to Judge Felton's embezzlement charges, as you've all said, and knock down a few of the little ones." Along the way, Jack seemed to have lost the desire to fight in the past, and he agreed indifferently. Everyone was surprised to find that the young leader showed a decadent expression for the first time, and their hearts couldn't stop their surprise. In the past few months, this young adult has been known for his exuberant energy, but this time he showed a rare look of decadence, which is surprising. Could it be that this lord has discovered a new difficulty, a difficulty that we cannot overcome, and chose to give up? At this moment, the same idea popped up in everyone's mind regarding this. Everyone had different thoughts in their hearts, and there was a sympathetic expression on their faces. Seeing Jack straight back, they only felt full of despair and loss of mind. Just when everyone was about to leave the room, leaving the young adult to face this setback alone, his deep voice rang in his ears. "Payne, Pym, you two stay here." There was some doubt in the eyes of the two who were about to leave, and they really didn't know what the leader was looking for. The others paused for a moment, then walked away quickly, and the rest has nothing to do with them. Talk about it. Why do these gentry bribe the judge, and what are the benefits? Jack changed his previous decadent appearance, looked into the eyes of the two with radiance, and asked directly this. We don't know about Oxford. I'm afraid we don't know very well. Payne touched his head and said embarrassedly, this must be a huge benefit, and the consequences are serious, otherwise they wouldn't spend so much money bribing this civilian judge. The old man Pym blinked, looked into Jack's eyes and said nonsense. Payne had a look of approval on his face, but he dismissed it in his heart. Jack, on the other hand, seemed to agree. Yes, this is a huge profit network. We just need to investigate which big families have grown rapidly in recent years. They are our targets. Jack nodded, showing a smile, and reasoned directly. The Matthew family, Pym and Payne said in unison, and then they glanced at each other, and at the same time, and laughed loudly. As a family that has expanded rapidly in recent years, the Matthew family has always been the object of discussion, and envy, jealousy and hatred have always been accompanied by this name. Parker Matthew is our current #1 target. The others went to investigate Felton John, and the three of us focused our energy on Sir Matthew. Jack looked at the two with piercing eyes, and said decisively, are you suspicious? Payne asked softly, don't think so much now, we just need to complete our task, and we will talk about it later. Jack did not deny Payne's words, but said such a meaningful sentence, which had to make Payne and Pym start to imagine. Okay, get ready, we will start track tomorrow. Remember, don't tell anyone, including those of our companions. Yes, my lord. Pym and Payne couldn't help but sink their hearts, and assured them earnestly. The two left the room with some heavy thoughts and exited the door. Only then did Pym realize that this was his own room, and he didn't know what to do when he stayed at the door. And Jack, who was sitting on the chair, also realized that this was not his room, so he could only walk out of the room with a face full of embarrassment, as if nothing happened. Chapter 238. Good news and bad news. There was a heavy rain in the middle of the night, and the air in the whole city of Oxford was much fresher. In the morning, the winter sun tried its best to cast rays of light, as if trying to give the beggars on the roadside a little warmth. And with the same hope, there are civilians who are often hungry and full. They wear airtight and thin clothes, and the cold wind passes through the holes, making the people in the wooden house shiver. As the judge of the circuit court, Felton John is not worried about the cold. The warmth of the fireplace burning charcoal all night kept him warm all night, and he had a good night's sleep comfortably. However, the heavy rain at night made the floor full of damp. Even though the diligent servants wiped it over and over again, the wooden boards in the house were still damp and slippery, and he almost slipped just now, but luckily his wife helped him, otherwise he might have fallen on his back, and if it got out, he would lose face a lot. He was so angry that he always had a good temper and scolded the servant who wiped the floor severely, which relieved his mood a little. Anna, you have to wipe it carefully. If I am satisfied, I will give you an extra meal at noon today, and I will reward you with a piece of big, fat pork. Felton looked at a black and fat maid in a white apron who was wiping the stairs in front of him. This was a servant he had hired in Oxford for 3 years. He felt that she had been performing well all along. He stopped and said encouragingly, yes, my lord. The black and fat maid replied with a look of surprise, straightened her waist, and bowed politely. And work hard. Felton nodded, using some small things to buy people's hearts. This is a good way he has always been, and it has made his popularity much better. He even got a good-hearted person Fedunton title after stepping down the next step. Felton was going to get some food in the kitchen. The fall in the morning had greatly reduced his appetite, and now he was a little hungry. Just when he was about to step down a step, he suddenly felt his feet being bumped, and his body uncontrollably rushed downstairs, and the maid's scream came from his ears. At this moment, he knew that he couldn't survive, and this fall would directly end his life. Sure enough, after he pounced down, his forehead hit the sharp step directly, and a big hole was cut in an instant, and a large amount of red liquid gushed out, soaking the smooth and bright stairs, and he only felt a piercing pain and a buzzing sound echoing in his ears. His own life was passing, and this was the only thing he thought about at this moment after he lost consciousness. His wife and children surrounded him, crying and complaining with such a large wound. Judging from the current medical level, it must be hopeless, and this news is also spreading to the 4 directions at a fast speed, and it first reached the ears of the 4 major families. You're done. The annoying flies are finally gone. Sir Matthew was eating lunch at this time. Hearing the good news, he didn't even have time to eat. He opened a bottle of red wine from France and drank with his family. The same is true for other people. Happy, troubled, and so on. As for Jack and the others who were immersed in the investigation of the Matthew family, they couldn't help being shocked, and their faces appeared solemn like never before. As the most important witness and the source of this incident, the importance of Felton John is self-evident. Jack was going to use him as a radish and pull out a pile of mud stuck to the roots, but this radish was cut off in the middle, so how could he find a shovel for digging mud? In this regard, Jack held back his troubled thoughts and told Pym and Payne to continue. The more and more clues here, they should not give up easily. After all, there is still no news about the follower, and I hope there will be a surprise. Jack frowned and thought, but he didn't hold out any hope in his heart. He caught a thief casually on the side of the road and told him to lead the way. Jack soon came to the original place last time and met the handsome gang leader. Holmes, my chief sir, I hope you can give me good news. Jack sat on the chair familiarly, crossed his legs, and stared at the handsome leader who was a little restless in front of him. Well, Mr. Liang, nothing is 100% perfect in this world. Holmes looked evasively, not daring to look directly into Jack's eyes, and said with some embarrassment, so, what's the specific situation? Jack narrowed his eyes, frowned, and continued to ask, you also know that we are all illiterate, so the value of some things is still unrecognizable. Besides, an accident happened to Judge John this morning. Our people hurriedly brought back some things, but there was no such thing as an account book that you asked for. As he said that, Holmes' voice became smaller and smaller, while Jack's gaze became more and more severe, which made Holmes curl up in fright. Of course, we are also sorry about this matter. As for the deposit, as he said that, Holmes lowered his head and secretly glanced at Jack, revealing his eyes like a money fan. But Jack went directly to the hill piled up with various documents in front of him, and searched hard, but he didn't hear Holmes' weaker and weaker voice at all. He didn't believe it was true. There must be something useful in all of this. He had to confirm it with his own eyes, otherwise he would not be reconciled with such emotions. Jack searched carefully, not letting go of an envelope or parchment in this way. After 10 minutes passed, just when he was about to lose confidence, a thin book with only a dozen pages appeared in front of him, and it was made of expensive paper from the European continent. Ben, at least 10 pounds more, gently opened a page, only to see it scrawled in English, "Today is an irritable day. That old man in Brill dared to confront me and call me a greedy bug. It made me mad." Seeing this, Jack was overjoyed. This Brill seemed to be talking about Brill John, the patriarch of the big Oxfordshire family. After looking carefully, the remaining few pages were filled with trivia. Moreover, Jack sorted out the text carefully and discovered a big secret. Felton John actually colluded with the 4 major families, deceived the anti-enclosure committee, and even the king, and vigorously supported several families to enclose land in Oxford. This is not a big deal. Enclosures are commonplace in England at present, but you have missed paying the royal family's tax for 3 years. It is currently planned to be the tax of the Ministry of Finance, which is a big problem, you know. In this era, even rebellion can be forgiven, and if you owe money to the king, it would be really terrible. There is no need to refund the deposit. These things are worth the price. Jack stuffed the diary into his pocket casually, stood up, and said to Holmes at this time, His Majesty the King, who was far away in London, encountered a bad thing and was in an extremely bad mood. Chapter 239, The Uprising and the Letter of Love. Norfolk County is located in the northeast of England and is a large agricultural county. Therefore, it has been favored by the royal family, and the county has a large number of royal territories. It is bounded by Suffolk to the south, Cambridgeshire and Lincolnshire to the west, and the North Sea to the east and north. Located in a lowland area, most of the county is located in river basins with abundant water resources. The agricultural area is divided into the Wensum River, the Yea River, the Beer River and their basins that flow into the North Sea. The northwest corner flows into the Ouse River Basin in Wash Bay. Both regions were rich agricultural regions, rich in products and fertile, and loved by nobles and gentlemen. As a result, this area has become a key area of concern for the enclosure. And the local farmers are miserable. Some people say that the enclosure movement is not the primitive accumulation of capital. This is the throes of social development and cannot be stopped. Of course, everyone is currently thinking and answering from a historical perspective, which is thousands of miles away from the interests of the King of England at this time. Originally, after Edward became king, he also believed that the enclosure movement was reasonable and should even be encouraged, but he was puzzled by the obstruction and even prohibition of Henry VIII and the Tudor government. This is why he agreed with Duke Edward, who opposed the enclosure, to lose power as a result. He didn't understand how much the enclosure movement hurt the government until he sat on the throne himself first. It seriously interferes with government tax collection. A large amount of public land is designated as private, which is equivalent to the innocent disappearance of taxes that originally belonged to farmers, and is passed on to the farmers who enclose the land, and they directly enclose the land as a farm, and almost all of them are abandoned. With a minimum of 30%. The land utilization rate is completely inferior to that of farmers, and the government receives less than half of the original tax as a result. The government's tax revenue is getting less and less, and the farmers are getting poorer and poorer, while the farmers who enclose the land have accumulated a lot of wealth. In other words, the original tax of £1,000 has become £500, and the other £500 have become those farmers. And second, it intensifies social conflict. Some people think, can't these peasants who have lost their land go to factories? How can you be hungry? Everyone thinks so beautifully. In the 16th century, how could there be so many factories that could accommodate so many workers? Moreover, most workers did not live as well as farmers, and it was common for them to have limbs and limbs broken. What about these people? You can only become refugees, beggars, beg everywhere, and when there is no food, all kinds of crimes are born to a certain extent. Anti-enclosure riots and uprisings took place as a matter of course, which had a great impact on the rule of the English royal family in this regard. In 1530, the Tudor government promulgated a decree, stipulating that, except for the elderly and those who are incapable of working, all beggars who are wandering and begging will be arrested, tied to the back of the carriage, and whipped until they bleed, and then forced to take a pledge of voluntary labor and sent back to his hometown. In 1536, the previous order was reiterated, and it was stipulated that anyone who violated the order for the second time and was arrested would have his ears cut off in half in addition to whipping, and those who violated the order for the third time would be sentenced to death as a result. During the reign of Henry VIII, the number of landless peasants executed amounted to 72,000. Third, and most importantly, it made it extremely difficult for the royal family to recruit civilians. There is a tradition in England that the royal family can regularly recruit militias to serve the royal family every year. However, the enclosure destroyed the source of soldiers, and conscription became more and more difficult. Generally speaking, militiamen are basically local farmers, and the enclosure has taken away their land and made them refugees, with fewer and fewer soldiers. This is why when Henry VIII fought in France, most of the soldiers in the army were mercenaries from Italy and Germany, and there were very few native English soldiers. This kind of sign is very scary. Historically, starting from the Stuart dynasty, serving as a soldier has become a lowly profession, and most of the soldiers come from young men. Even in the 19th century, after seeing these three most important reasons, Edward was full of hatred for the enclosure movement compared with his own rule. Capitalism is nothing. He can't rule the country anymore. No matter how well England develops, it will not benefit him. Just when he was about to complete the local reforms and all parts of the country worked together to stop the enclosure movement, he received a letter at this time. This is a letter from Norfolk, and the specific address is Moosehold Moor, northeast of Norwich City, and led by Robert Cate and his elder brother William Cate. A group of representatives from the 100 household district also signed the joint letter Chen Love letter, which was sent to London, and finally handed over to the palace, Edward's desk. I saw the words above. Respected Majesty, we have no intention of offending your Majesty. This is just a self-help behavior of our poor people. Please forgive us for our rude behavior. We have written this letter to tell you that your people are currently suffering endless torments, and in this regard, we ask you to implement some measures. After reading this large petition letter with tens of thousands of words, Edward couldn't help sneering in his heart. Some of the sympathy he had for them had disappeared in this letter. Edward summed up, this Robert Cate actually directly threatened the king to implement what they thought first. Enclosures are prohibited, and no one is allowed to rob their cattle and sheep. Second, the enclosed land cannot be used for grazing. Third, lower land rents and keep fines for seizing land and houses at the same level as in 1485. Fourth, reduce the salaries of priests. Fifth, to allow them to take part in the administration of government which only the country gentry can participate in. If Edward agreed to these conditions, the surrender of a group of peasants, not to mention the reputation of the central government and the royal family, would be ruined. After these conditions are implemented, the Tudor royal family will offend all the gentlemen in the area, and the rule of England will be crumbling. Of course, Edward is not that stupid. He would agree to the conditions of these farmers, so that if all the cats and dogs revolted, the government would have to bow their heads. What has become of that country? More importantly, the uprising led by Robert Cate has reached more than 20,000 people, which is a huge number in England. Moreover, Edward just got the news that with the support of the unemployed residents of the city, They captured the second largest city in England, Norwich, which made Edward very angry. This is not just a demand riot, but a rebellion. A rebellion according to the original history. The uprising was suppressed for half a year for unknown reasons, and the scale was much larger. This may be the butterfly effect. Chapter 240 The leaky room meets the continuous night drain. These people may have originally wanted to gather more people to strengthen their momentum and force the government to agree to their conditions, but as soon as they took Norwich, the whole nature of the matter was reversed. From petition to rebellion for rebellion, all rulers can think of only one word: repression. The house leak happened to reign overnight, and just as Edward was about to send out the guards to attack, news came from the west of England that there was a great rebellion in Devonshire and Cornwall because of the prayer book, sweeping across the country. Devon and Cornwall, with a lot of momentum in the final analysis. This rebellion was still because of Edward. As said in the previous section, His Majesty the King continued to carry out religious reforms, and promulgated the second book of public prayer, ordering all priests to conduct religious activities in accordance with the new book of public prayer. And all of this, for conservatives, it can also be said that for Catholic faithful believers, this is unforgivable. It is a bad act of betraying God, and it is a heresy. Sometimes a heretic is worse than a heretic. If it was not at that time, everyone would not know the persistence of Europeans in faith for one belief. The French Calvinists and Catholics fought a civil war for 30 years, with countless massacres, which directly led to the demise of a French Valois dynasty and the establishment of the Bourbon dynasty led by a young priest in Devonshire. The angry and ignorant people raised their shovels and rakes in a large-scale uprising, and their goal was directed at London. Moreover, the rebellion spanned a wider range, involving Devonshire and Cornwall, and was echoed by Catholics, reaching tens of thousands of people. More importantly, the target of this uprising is London, that is, King Edward of England, which has to make Our Majesty the King terrified. The fighting power of fanatics cannot be underestimated, even if they are all composed of farmers, but the fighting power can be said to be one heaven and one underground. Moreover, for the sake of faith, those fanatics said that they might not directly kill His Majesty the King, and the peasant uprising led by Robert Cade, like all peasants at that time, was short-sighted and delusional. They will not have the impulse of the Chinese to become kings, but like the peasants at this time, expecting to negotiate with the king, they wrote a letter to London, expressing their request, which is compromised and weak in this regard. Edward decided that the biggest threat at present is the uprising from the west of England. One is to want my own life, and the other is to negotiate conditions with myself. It is an individual's choice. Emma. Edward put down the letter in his hand, and called out the door anxiously. Your Majesty. Emma heard His Majesty's hoarse voice in the room, got up urgently, opened the door, bent down, panting, and replied to the king with a thumping chest, reject all the appointments now, and immediately notify the Knight Alexander of the Guards to come here to see me, and act immediately. The room was a bit dim, and Emma couldn't see His Majesty's face clearly, but from the different tone of voice, he could still feel that His Majesty's mood was more anxious now, and something bad must have happened. Follow your order. The girl trembled. Emma lifted the corners of her skirt with both hands, performed a lady's salute, and when she was about to leave, she suddenly heard His Majesty's words again. Wait. Edward looked at the plump body opposite, thought for a while, and continued, send someone to inform Earl Wellington and ask him to come see me immediately. Yes. Emma nodded quickly and said, but, Your Majesty, the Marquis of Edinburgh is not in London, but in Edinburgh. I'm afraid I won't be able to make it in a while. Hearing this sentence, Edward patted his forehead. He had already gone to Edinburgh, and the far water could not save the near fire. Now he regretted that he canonized Edinburgh. There are too few generals in England, and Edward couldn't help sighing in his heart. Originally, Duke Edward and Earl of Warwick were considered good generals, but their current identities are not suitable for controlling the army, which is a bit difficult. Go, send a letter to the Marquis of Northampton, asking him to summon the militiamen in Northampton and the nearby counties, and go to Norwich immediately. For the mob, we should mainly contain them and supplement them with encirclement and suppression. Don't act rashly. Edward pondered for a while, and the closest and most suitable one is the Marquis of Northampton, the younger brother of the former Queen Catherine, William Parr. First of all, his title can suppress the local militia, and he is a new nobleman with too little qualifications, so it is impossible to control those militia and rebel. Moreover, the combat effectiveness of the militia is much higher than that of the mob, so the requirements for the general's ability do not need to be too high. Moreover, the relationship between Edward and Queen Catherine is not bad, so it is not bad to give credit to His Excellency the Marquis. And the girl looked at the young king's pensive appearance, her eyes gradually focused on his face. She didn't know what she was thinking, and her fair face was flushed. "Emma? What are you doing?" After Edward finished thinking, he looked at the nympho girl and reminded her, "I'm sorry, Your Majesty, I'll go right away." Interrupted by Edward's voice, Emma lowered her head, turned around in embarrassment, and left quickly. In this regard, Edward shook his head, not paying attention. Soon, the Alexander Knight walked in front of Edward with graceful steps, wearing a white cloak, and saluted Edward gracefully. I have to say that watching the salute of the Knight Alexander is really a wonderful experience. Sitting on the chair, Edward was a little lost in thought. "Get up. My Mr. Knight, come and see these." As he spoke, Edward moved forward a secret letter on the table that had been sent by the Bloodblade from Devonshire and Cornwall, motioning him to take a look. Seeing this, Knight Alexander took a step forward, picked up the envelope and looked at it. His handsome face slowly frowned, which made Edward feel a little distressed. Pooh. I'm not gay, I'm not gay," Edward kept thinking. "Your Majesty, do you want me to lead an army to quell the chaos?" After reading the letter, Knight Alexander raised his head, looked at Edward, and asked softly, "Yes, Mr. Knight, I think these mobs are just a piece of cake for you. Besides, the guards also need to see blood. If you keep training, it won't do you any good." Edward's face was calm, and he said softly, his tone was full of confidence in him, which moved Alexander's heart. "Since you trust me so much, I will definitely not let you down. Please wait for my good news." Alexander's face was a little moved, his eyes were fixed for a moment, and he said decisively. Chapter 241 Measures. Knight Alexander's blue eyes rolled around, and his fair and handsome face was full of determination. Edward's eyes turned to him, and there was an inexplicable sense of knights coming and going in and out of his eyes hundreds of years ago, which was a little amazing. "I am afraid that this is the real knight, loyal and dedicated, upright and kind, loving and respectful. This is the same concept as Chinese taxis dying for their confidants." Edward thought silently, and Alexander is not like this. Most people see his handsome face and think that he is based on his face, but ignore his record of following Henry VIII to France. For Knight Alexander, it was an insult, but the young king in front of him has never been like this. He did not abandon or even suppress him because of his previous relationship with His Majesty Henry VIII that should not be exposed. Instead, he trusted him more than Henry VIII. First reform and control the guards, and then let him lead the guards to attack a group of Catholic thugs, even though he didn't know the Chinese saying that a soldier dies for his confidant. But similar thoughts emerged in his heart. Therefore, at this moment, Alexander looked a little emotional, his eyes were a little red, his face was inexplicably excited, and a different kind of smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Seeing this, Edward felt himself shivering all over, and an uncomfortable feeling became stronger and stronger. "Your Majesty, are you all right?" Knight Alexander leaned over and greeted with concern. His handsome face lost the previous cold expression, which made Edward feel even more awkward. "It's nothing, Mr. Knight, it's just a little cold." Facing such Alexander Knight, Edward quickly waved his hands and said hastily, "Mr. Knight, you immediately lead the 3,000 guards and call the militiamen of Devonshire and Cornwall to act together." Edward resisted the uncomfortable feeling in his heart, and ordered directly, "Yes, Your Majesty." After seeing that the king was fine, Alexander calmed down this time, and quietly listened to the king's orders. "No, you call the militias from the nearby Dorset and Somerset counties. I think the last 20,000 should be there, plus 3,000 guards. These are enough to deal with those mobs." Edward stood up, walked a few steps, and said casually, "So, what should we do with those mobs in the end?" Alexander asked, bending slightly. "Kill," Edward said directly with a ruthless look on his face. "Kill all the leaders of the group. As for the mobs who participated, escort them to Ireland together, force them to convert, and together with their families, I think after they become Protestants, they will automatically fight those Irish people without us chasing them." Thinking of this good method, Edward couldn't help feeling complacent, and a sneer appeared on the corner of his mouth. Although Henry VIII forced the Irish Parliament to grant the Tudor monarch the title of King of Ireland, England only controlled Dublin and some nearby areas, less than 1/10 of Ireland's land, and its population was only tens of thousands. However, after England invaded Dublin, Ireland, it drove away the local residents and nobles, and occupied most of the land. Except for some soldiers and nobles who were rewarded for the expedition, the rest belonged to the royal family. Most of the Irish believe in Catholicism. If they move their group of Protestants into Ireland, if they don't want to be bullied, they can only rely on the local garrison. Yes. Alexander hesitated for a moment, feeling that His Majesty the King was too harsh to implicate his family, but when he remembered that this was a Catholic rebellion, Such a punishment was relatively light. Knight Alexander felt pity for the actions of those mobs. "Isn't this courting death?" He bent down, saluted the king standing in front of him, and then quietly chose to leave. At this time, Edward was also thinking about how to deal with the suppression of the rebellion in the northeast, and whether they should all move to Ireland to carry out colonial expansion and expand the scope of England's rule in this way, including the Catholics in the West and their families. The total number will exceed 100,000, and you must know that there are currently only 3 million people in England and Wales, accounting for 1/30 of the population under his rule. This is not a small number. Moreover, this money is definitely not from the central government. They have no money and can only be paid by the royal family. Some people say that they can all be reduced to serfs. However, England abolished serfdom in name in the 14th century, and the nobles were forced to give up most of their serfs, and the judicial power was transferred to the royal family. Therefore, in addition to the royal family and some great nobles who still retain some serfs, a new class has emerged in England: land renters, that is, tenants. To degrade so many people into serfs in this way is against England's tradition and is not recognized by people. Forget it, let's talk about it after we win. What am I doing? Suddenly, Edward found that he was thinking wildly. The war has not yet been won, at least 1 or 2 months away, so there is no rush at present. At this time, Norwich City, the second largest city in England and the textile and leather center of England, no longer belonged to King Edward. A group of mobs occupied the place, and their leader Robert Cade and others used Norwich Cathedral in the city center as a conference center. As a believer, in Europe, no matter how big the conflict between Protestantism and Catholicism is, no one dares to destroy the church, let alone these mobs who opposed the enclosure. Therefore, after discussing with the priests of the church, out of desperation, the bishop of the church reluctantly lent some rooms to these mobs. As for the priest who lived in the church since he was a child, Acha is only 14 years old this year, and his youthful face is full of dissatisfaction with these mobs. In the morning, on the way to pray, when he passed those occupied rooms, his face showed a resentful expression. The well-educated him gave a rare soft poo, clenched his fists, and walked away quickly. The guard at the door had a helpless and angry expression on his face, and he had nothing to do about such a thing. From Acha's point of view, these mobs are lazy and inactive, their families have nothing, and they don't want to find a job to live. Instead, after losing their jobs, they launched a rebellion and dared to desecrate God's holy place. It is unforgivable. This is not his only view. Acha's views represent the views of most English people. They think that these landless farmers are poor because of laziness, not because of land enclosure. Chapter 242, The Beginning of Cade and Number 039's Uprising. Speaking of the Cade Rebellion, I have to talk about Sir John Flowerdew and Robert Cade. These two are the most important roles in this uprising. No, the rebellion. How to say? One is the fuse of this matter, and the other is the leader of this matter. Their relationship is like the later Charles I and Lord Protector Cromwell. The cause of the matter also has something to do with Henry VIII, and even involves some royal history. King Henry II of England appointed Thomas Becket as Archbishop of Canterbury, which was appointed by the Pope at that time, but he did not refuse Henry II's appointment to him. However, after he became the Archbishop of Canterbury, the largest bishop in England, he often opposed Henry II, and the original purpose of using him to achieve the expansion of kingship failed. However, Pope Alexander II recognized his performance very much, thinking that he was a truly devout believer, and canonized him as a saint. He was also called St. Thomas Becket, and there were special festivals in the calendar when Henry VIII saw a saint who was very unpleasant. After the Reformation, he was disgusted by this kind of saint who restricted the royal power, and Our Majesty Henry VIII cannot exempt him from the title of saint, but can only exempt this celebration from the calendar. But this year, the residents of Windham Town still hold commemorative events every year at this time. John Flowerdew appeared on the stage, and these celebrating residents rushed to his house in a rush, demolished the hedges and fences of his house, and humiliated him severely. And this has something to do with Henry VIII. John Flowerdew acted as a government supervisor and demolished Windham Abbey. More importantly, as a lawyer, on the way to become a squire, he wantonly encloses land in his hometown, and his reputation in the village is very bad. And we all know that reputation is very important in this period in England. Even if you have a lot of wealth, if your reputation is not enough, then the possibility of you being a government official is very low. But with so many enclosures, they unanimously turned their goals to the notorious Sir John Flowerdew. He deserved it, and Sir John Flowerdew was insulted and humiliated by the villagers after the fence was destroyed by the villagers. He was very unbalanced, and his reputation in the countryside could be said to have been ruined once, and his stink was indescribable. Why do so many enclosures only scold me, and the others also enclose land? I have only gone too far, thought Sir John indignantly, but at this time, the bad nature of our human beings came, and he didn't dare to blame those villagers. After all, there were so many of them. Instead, he was going to let his deadly enemy, Robert Cade, have a taste of being humiliated, and Robert Cade is also a nearby farmer with great influence. After all, he has little influence and cannot lead the uprising to command tens of thousands of people. As a well-known large farmer, Robert Cade's family certainly had a lot of land, otherwise they wouldn't be famous for their wealth. In response, Sir John bribed the humiliating rioters for 4d each to go to Robert Cade's house, while he stayed at home and waited for some exciting news. However, the news he waited for made his jaw drop in shock. Like him, Robert Cade is also a knight. It can be said that his status is the same as that of a knight. He belongs to the gentleman class, but he is only at the bottom. But this is also much higher than those who hold public books, owner farmers, and land renters. Tenant households. Cade, who is already 57 years old, has a pleasant face towards those who dismantle their own fences, discusses them sentence by sentence, and listens carefully to their complaints. After he learned that they were dismantling the fence of his house because of land enclosure, he resolutely agreed with the villagers' move, and he also strongly supported it, calling on more people to participate. And, under his leadership, the peasant masses tore down all the landowner fences in Windham Township. Later, the huge team attracted more and more landless farmers and land renters. Afterwards, a large number of unemployed workers and bankrupt craftsmen in Norwich joined, and the number rapidly expanded to more than 20,000. The rebel army drew up 29 programs in the jungle camp on Moshold Hill near Norwich, and sent them to the king, that is, the letter of petition. In Edward's hand as an uprising team, of course, it must have its own program, such as the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom's equal land rights, etc., and it must have appeal to encourage more people to join. Proposed, tear down the fence, fill the ditches, let everyone have the opportunity to use the pastures of the commune, hoping to use everything freely, equally and equally. The detailed rules require, no one shall enclose land in the future. No manor lord shall be free to purchase land. Farmers can share the benefits of the manor common land, and have the right to use the common land. All farmers shall receive freedom. From now on, no tithe shall be levied on residents, as well as restrictions on the amount of monetary ground rent, etc. According to the words of the Chinese textbooks of later generations, this is an incomplete and relatively moderate program. It does not propose the abolition of feudal land ownership and the removal of the peasant's attachment to the land. It only reflects the interests of small nobles and wealthy peasants. Cannot meet the requirements of the vast number of poor peasants and urban poor. It reflects the weakness and compromise of the peasant class, so its failure is doomed. Of course, despite this, Edward still needs to face it seriously. History is history. Who knows what he will become? Maybe this time it is an uprising, and after a while, he will develop ambitions and become a rebellion. Moreover, France has always been eyeing England. It will not give up such a good opportunity. If it were him, he would not give up either. Robert Cade, who is 57 years old this year, is already considered old in this age, but he did not hesitate to revolt. There is no doubt that he is an idealist. An old man at the end of his life abandoned his wealthy family and led the family into an abyss. Edward admired this kind of idealist, but, often, this kind of idealist died the fastest, and Robert sat in the meeting room with no worry on his face. Instead, because he achieved his goal and occupied Norwich, even with silver sideburns, he was still radiant and full of vitality. Seeing the leader like this, the flustered hearts of other high-level officials who were worried about the government's suppression gradually calmed down. Don't worry, my sir. I think His Majesty the King will definitely agree with the program. He is so kind. As God's agent in the world, compassion is born with him. As he spoke, Robert said confidently, confident that the king would agree to their request. Besides, so many of us have occupied Norwich, His Majesty the King will definitely negotiate with us. Chapter 243. The Marquess of Northampton sends troops. Robert looked around, stood upright, with an optimistic smile on his face, and said to everyone energetically. A calm confidence deeply affected everyone, and the people who participated in the meeting also settled down. They also believed that His Majesty the King would definitely negotiate peace with them. After all, they were normal protests. Yes, even now that they have captured Norwich, the second largest city in England, they still think their actions are noble, pure, and even peaceful. You must know that their behavior at this time has won the support of the people in the eastern part of England, and every move has a profound impact on England. According to Sir Robert's understanding, these nobles will definitely make compromises and make appropriate concessions in order to quell the uprising. The royal family will definitely think twice before acting. After all, if there is a forcible suppression, the reputation of the royal family will definitely be greatly damaged, and His Majesty the King will definitely compromise. Of course, everyone knew in their hearts that the biggest bargaining chip in their hands was the 20,000 army in their hands, a huge opponent assembled by landless people, unemployed workers, proletarians, etc., which made the group of nobles be cautious and dare not act rashly. And the people in the conference room also nodded, expressing their approval of Mr. Jez's words, and it could even be said that they believed deeply. Therefore, after obtaining Norwich, they did not continue to expand. Taking Norwich was already the biggest shock to the English government. If they continue to expand, what awaits them is the fate of being suppressed. Moreover, most of the people sitting here are speculators. Except for those who joined in at the beginning, the rest are basically speculating on this fate-changing riot, so as to gain greater capital for their political career. Everyone has to be prepared. Before we negotiate, we have to fight these nobles. We can't let them underestimate us, otherwise we won't even have the chance to negotiate. Robert's smile gradually faded away, replaced by a serious expression, full of folds and gray beard, giving people a great shock. Everyone also stopped teasing in private, put their attitudes straight, their faces became serious, and they pretended to be listening. So, everyone is now preparing for war immediately. I think that group of nobles are already on their way. Robert raised his head and looked out the window, frowned, and said softly, "Yes, Your Excellency." "Yes, sir." Everyone condensed their faces and shouted loudly. "However, don't worry, the first ones are just the forwards, the number will not be too many, we will definitely win." Seeing the worried expressions on everyone's face, Robert smiled to relieve the pressure. "I think, as long as we defeat this striker, then the nobles and the king will definitely negotiate with us. At that time, I think, everyone will definitely join the district management and break the monopoly of those gentry." At the end of the talk, Robert's voice became more and more serious, making everyone's hearts itch, not to mention how intense the excitement in their hearts was, and they spoke out their aspirations. "Your Excellency, we absolutely obey your orders." "Your Excellency, speak out your orders." "Resolutely obey your orders," everyone said one sentence to another. Anyway, there is only one central meaning, and there is only one core of this team, and that is Robert Cade. In this regard, Robert felt a little complacent. After all, many people here had a reputation no less than his. His position as the top leader had always been somewhat unstable. With this opportunity, his position was finally stabilized. It is true that he launched the riot for the sake of everyone, but this is in line with the direction in which he sought the position of leader of all these. There is, and only he, can lead this increasingly large group, so as to seek benefits for everyone. This is not contradictory, Sir Robert thought in his heart, and he did not feel a little inappropriate for his behavior. So, from the very beginning, he pulled his elder brother in to realize this big dream together, of course, also to control the highest power. The cheers from the crowd, as well as the enthusiastic focus of their gaze, greatly stimulated Robert's vanity, which made Mr. Jez enjoy the process immensely. In his heart, he even hoped that the negotiation would come later. At this time, it has been a week since the uprising, or riot, and our Lord William Parr, Marquis of Northampton, became more and more excited. Everyone said that Edward Seymour was promoted to nobleman by relying on the Queen's nepotism. Consciously or unintentionally, he forgot that he captured Boulogne for England and also plundered Scotland. However, he really came up through his nepotism. As the younger brother of the former Queen Catherine, he has not made any achievements, so he can be regarded as a relative of the Emperor. However, this aristocrat is just a court aristocrat with a good reputation. He has no fief and can only receive a prescribed salary in the royal court every year. He knew that every time he met those hereditary nobles, although they would be more affectionate with you, it was only because of his sister's prestige. As soon as he turned around, he despised himself from the bottom of his heart, and every woman was a marquis. Moreover, after Henry VIII's death, this kind of contempt had been brought to the surface, which made him very aggrieved and annoyed. But this time, thanks to His Majesty the King's attention, ordering him to suppress a group of rioters and mobs is simply giving him credit. This time, at least a few manners have to be scooped up and passed on to future generations. What's more, this time the mob captured Norwich City, which is one of the richest cities in England. Therefore, as soon as he got the good news, the Marquis immediately summoned the Northamptonshire militia and prepared to make a fortune. Regarding His Majesty's words, he completely ignored them. A group of mobs? No matter how many people there are, can they still defeat the officers and soldiers? And of course the gentlemen and nobles in the county will not let go of such a good opportunity. This is an obvious way to pick up cheap and make a fortune. If you don't go, you will be a bastard. Therefore, in less than a week, he gathered more than 1,500 people in Northamptonshire, which is an amazing speed. Our Lord Marcus, William Parr, rode a big black horse and walked in front. The silk on the helmet is fluttering in the wind, the body is covered with fancy armor, decorated with beautiful feathers and calico, and the feet are wearing leather boots inlaid with gold thread, as if they are not here to fight, but to parade not only him, but also the other nobles and squires who joined the team. They were all dressed up, and each one was more gorgeous than the other. Affected by this incident, the soldiers also became scattered, and the formation of the team was also scattered. If you don't know the details, you might think you're participating in a carnival. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 244 Silence and Strength. Lord Marcus didn't wait for the militiamen from several nearby counties to gather, so he hurriedly assembled more than 1,500 militiamen to fight, expecting to suppress these mobs in one fell swoop and gain a lot of wealth and credit. As the saying goes, a raging nest of generals deeply interprets the influence of generals on the army. Since Lord Marcus is so confident, then what else do we need to worry about? The soldiers generally thought, and their mood became more cheerful, and some even sang love songs. Lovely girl, I'm about to leave my beautiful hometown. How I hope this beautiful flower can accompany you forever on my behalf. Lovely girl, I'm about to leave your warm embrace. How I wish I could be by your side like the warm sun. Lovely girl. Riding on a horse, His Excellency the Marquis, together with many senior officers of the army, walked at the forefront of the army, guiding the path of the team. Beside him, a pale, well-dressed old man in his 50s rode on horseback side by side with the Marquis. He was the guide of the army and also a nearby squire. My lord, after crossing this river and walking 5 miles, you will arrive at Wyndham Town, which is the hometown of the leader of the mob, Robert Cate. As he said that, Sir John Flowerdew gritted his teeth, with a look of resentment on his face. If you go more than 10 miles ahead, you will be occupied by those mobs. No, those rebels, my lord. Sir John, who was happy to speak, was about to continue, but His Excellency the Marquis stretched out his hand to stop his next words, closed his eyes, and listened carefully, with a look of enjoyment. And at this moment, Sir John heard the bursts of singing coming from his ear, and the echoing singing became louder and louder. Reaching up to the sky, listen, sir, what a delightful sound it is. Lord Marcus listened for a while, and said to Sir John with an expression of admiration and joy, my soldiers are confident that this war will be won. Those mobs will not be our opponents. Marcus William shook his head. His expression was full of confidence, as if he was invincible in the world. Seeing this, the corners of Sir John's mouth twitched, and he complimented against his will, which made Marcus William even more imposing. And Sir John craned his neck tremblingly, looked at the scattered militia troops behind him, but couldn't stop sighing in his heart. It seems that His Excellency the Marquis is really arrogant. How can such an army defeat the mob that is said to have 20,000 people? This attack will fail in all likelihood, so I have to hurry up and take a step. I'm afraid that kid Robert will be the leader for a while. Thinking of this, Sir John shook his head, very unwilling. Really not reconciled. Mr. Jazz, are you all right? Marcus William, who was listening to the song, asked with some concern when he saw John Flowerdew's face turn pale. Lord Marcus still values this guy very much. After all, he is the person who knows Robert Cate best. With him around, he can still think about character combat. It's nothing, Lord Marcus, it's just that my body is too much to bear. I'm afraid I won't be able to help you anymore. Sir John hunched over and looked older and older. Marquis William couldn't bear it. And you go back. I think you can go back and rest. Marcus William didn't find anything abnormal. The pure feeling is that the old man's health is not good. After all, he is close to 60 years old, and it is normal to have some conditions. Thank you for your understanding, Sir John said gratefully, pretending to cough. Soon, Sir John was led back by the knight and asked him to go back to rest. Before leaving, Sir John took a deep look at Marquis William, who was still looking unconcerned, shook his head, and followed a knight to leave. At this time, in Norwich City, Robert Cate also knew of the arrival of the army, and the entire conference room was silent. Even though he had an army of nearly 20,000, But in the face of the incoming government army, the confidence in everyone's hearts disappeared without a trace in an instant. They were not as excited as they were a few days ago, and the entire conference room was filled with fear and worry. It can't go on like this. Robert Kate stood up abruptly, patted the table heavily, and said in a calm voice everyone was frightened by his aura, and their expressions froze immediately. We have to take the initiative to attack instead of staying in the city and use our huge number advantage to directly attack them. Only in this way can we win. Looking at the silent crowd, Robert made this decision, and the others froze for a moment, then clapped their hands listlessly, agreeing to the decision. Robert glanced around for a week, blowing his beard and staring, watching the meeting scene like stagnant water, and left angrily. Robert did what he said, and he gathered a team of more than 20,000 people in Norwich outside the city. The defenders were only some old, young, sick and disabled, and the number was less than 100 standing on the high platform. He looked at the endless army in front of him, feeling overwhelmed and full of pride in these various patchwork troops below. Also looked at the silver-haired old man on the stage with flushed faces, and his unyielding figure was deeply engraved in their hearts. Robert didn't speak. He knew that these patchwork troops knew what they were doing, and it was useless to say more, and the soldiers also stood quietly without making a sound, like sculptures one by one, just looking at the old man on the high platform adoringly. They know that this is a fateful moment, and at this moment, nothing is more powerful than silence. Go. After staring for about 10 minutes, Robert shouted loudly with all his strength, while the soldiers responded with silence, quietly following their superiors. At this time, Marquis William had already driven the army to Windham Town and was heading for Norwich City on flat ground less than 5 miles from Norwich, and less than a mile apart. The two armies met unexpectedly. There are quite a lot of these rioters, but we are not afraid. Marquis William took a monocular from his attendant, looked at the huge army on the opposite side, and said with a smile to the senior officers around him, but he was a little surprised in his heart. Although the army on the opposite side was in rags, it was menacing, like a beast fighting with all its strength, which made people frightened. Thinking in his heart, Marquis William had a calm expression on his face, and even chatted with the people around him. But when he looked back at the scattered army behind him, an ominous premonition filled his heart. No, it can't be like this. We have to take the initiative. Marquis William thought about it, immediately raised his hand, and waved it fiercely towards the front. Chapter 245. Unbelievable. At this moment, under the leadership of Robert, a mob of 20,000 people slowly approached a militia led by Marquis William. Although the soldiers were in rags, their ages were uneven, and their faces were yellow and thin, they were full of energy. They did not have the mentality of compromise in the face of noble lords. In normal times, it can be said that all of them had a new look on their faces. This is an attitude of striving for ideals in this era when hot weapons have not yet been fully popularized. Fighting depends purely on the troops' ability to withstand casualties. Whoever is not afraid of death will win in the end, of course. At present, the difference between the two teams is that one trains frequently, and the other is composed of poor people, and their combat effectiveness is not directly proportional. That's why thousands of officers and soldiers chased tens of thousands of rebels to run away. In history at this time, the expeditionary force of more than 1,000 people composed of local militia did not pay attention to the 20,000 people who came from the opposite side. In fact, they didn't know how many people were on the other side, but the blind confidence of the officers completely infected them, and an extraordinary optimism spread in the militia. They were all militiamen, which meant they had no uniform. Some wore broken armor handed down from their ancestors, some wore a short shirt. All kinds of clothes were strange and varied. What is more uniform is that their weapons are exactly the same. They are all standard weapons stored in the county, long spears and longbows. And Robert led more than 20,000 mobs, with all kinds of weapons, such as lamb forks, wooden spades, spears and so on. For this reason, Marquis William specially made all the people on his side wear white cloaks, while Robert made the people on his side wear black long scarves around their arms. Therefore, from a distance, the militiamen in the vast expanse of white held long guns, and listened to the command of the Marquis, and walked forward with ease regardless of his own age. Robert stood on a high platform that he built casually, looked into the distance, and saw the steady-footed militiamen approaching slowly. His eyebrows frowned involuntarily. Sir, what should we do? On the side, a worried adjutant approached, looked at the dignified Robert, and asked. Wait. Robert looked into the distance and opened his lips slightly. When they get closer to us, we will directly take advantage of the number of people and attack directly in one go. Only in this way can we have a little chance of winning. Indeed, we don't have strong control over the army, so we can only rush over directly, hoping that the king's people will be directly dispersed." The adjutant sighed. "Only this choice is the most suitable at present," and then he turned his head to look at the army behind him. The worry in his eyes flashed away. Although the army has a large number of people, its composition is too complex, and the command system has not been established, so it can only bite the bullet and go to the battlefield soon. The White Army approached step by step, and the optimism made the army look majestic and indomitable, and the 20,000 troops behind Robert also appeared in a continuous white formation. And the neat formation brought great depression to everyone immediately. Everyone looked at the Kate family emblem on the banner, and their hearts immediately settled down. Everyone believed that Mr. Robert would lead everyone to victory regardless of his old body. Robert rode on a big black horse, staring straight ahead at the approaching army and the family emblem of the Marquis of Northampton fluttering in the long wind, without any sense of fear. "Hello, Sir Kate. Our Lord Marquis asked me to tell you that your betrayal of the king is unforgivable, but if you surrender now, there may still be a way out." A cavalryman ran over, sat on the horse and bowed politely, then raised his chin and said proudly, "Please tell His Excellency the Marquis of Northampton that this war is inevitable. As long as the enclosure is still going on, we will not stop." Robert sat on the horse and took off his hat to salute. English people are always so persistent about etiquette. Seeing Robert Kate's sonorous and forceful answer, the courier reined in the horse, looked at the stubborn old man carefully, and then rode away without looking back after receiving this reply. Marcus William showed no surprise on his face. He just ordered the troops to speed up and resolve the battle as soon as possible. "This is the best result." Soon, the militiamen who slowed down began to move forward again in a menacing manner. The spearmen's iron spearheads were shining coldly, which made people feel panicked. The mobs were not to be outdone. Although they lacked all weapons, their silent and oppressive atmosphere directly made the militiamen who were getting closer feel a little hesitant. But the Earl's order was unquestionable, and his footsteps did not stop at all at this time. Only blood can be used to witness the victory. The pikemen in the front row were like a sharp dagger piercing into the mob, causing huge casualties to the mob at once. The longbowmen in the rear fired cold arrows. Swish swish. The ragged mobs were basically unable to parry, and a blank space was cleared around the pikemen in the rear. Marcus William held up the binoculars. Seeing such a scene, his worries dissipated a lot, and he showed a smile. Then, the Marquis's smile suddenly froze. His eyes filled with disbelief. The picture turned around, and on the emptied white ground, mobs rushed up one after another, without any fear. If you look carefully, you can even see the ferocious and fanatical faces of those people. Clearly seeing this, Marcus William was shocked. He didn't understand what happened to these mobs. They were so violent. The pikemen in the front row felt the most profoundly about this. They felt that they were a rock facing the endless waves, one wave after another, and the pressure was enormous. All kinds of weapons rushed at them, and soon overwhelmed the nearly 1,000 pikemen in front of them, and the white figure disappeared after a few flashes. So, in less than 10 minutes, the pikemen were basically wiped out, surrounded, or dead. "Quick, quick, let the longbowmen evacuate, evacuate quickly." Seeing the mob getting closer to the longbowmen in the rear, Marcus William knew that he had failed, so he hurriedly ordered the messenger to convey his military order. "Let's go too, hurry up." Marcus William eagerly ordered the guards beside him. "These mobs are crazy, really crazy." The Marquis pulled the reins, turned the horse's head, and said to the guards following him, then turned his head and glanced at the submerged spear phalanx with complicated eyes. Soon, the Marquis' only guards followed his footsteps without hesitation and evacuated urgently. "Mr. Jazz, do we want to chase?" The adjutant looked at the retreating Marquis and others, and asked softly. Chapter 246. The nervous Oxford City. Faced with the adjutant's question, Robert shook his head, looked at the soldiers who had been fighting with serious eyes, and said directly, "You have to know, what is the purpose of our battle this time? In this battle, we only need to defeat Marcus William's troops, not capture him. If we chase after him, even if we capture His Excellency the Marquis, I think next time, what awaits us is not the negotiating envoys, but the swarming army, German mercenaries, militias from all over the world, tens of thousands, and so on. In our current situation, we cannot escape death." The adjutant suddenly realized, nodded, and then came to his senses. He was also too happy for a while, and forgot the real gap. If Marcus William was captured, he would at most ask for a ransom, but it made their situation worse several times, and violated the goal of promoting talks through fighting. Besides, in our state, how can we chase after it? Robert said leisurely. "Let the children stop. Too much bloodshed will only spread the hatred further." Robert turned his head, glanced at the adjutant, and then sighed. The aura of compassion was beyond words, which made the adjutant admire him even more. After a while, the excited mob stopped their movements, and there were less than 500 of the 1,000 spearmen alive, and the others fell into a pool of blood, struggling from time to time to feel their presence. But at this time, Oxfordshire is in a state of turmoil, and the atmosphere is tense and frightening. In winter, leisurely Oxford people can no longer chat in pubs, make nonsense, or walk drunk on the streets, make noise or fight all the people huddled at home, not daring to speak too loudly, and looked out of the window from time to time, for fear of being knocked on the door. The bachelor Watson, who was drunk all day yesterday, got up from the plank bed in a daze, rubbed his eyes, and felt that his throat was almost dry. Regardless of putting on his shoes, he directly took the wooden bowl, scooped up a little residual water from the bottom wooden barrel, and sent it directly to his mouth. Regardless of the impurities in the water, after his throat felt better, Watson went back, put on the straw sandals, put on a thin patched coat, and looked out the window for some light. Then he opened the broken door of his own house and prepared to go to the tavern to spend the day. For a bachelor like him, in winter, the tavern is the best place for them to go. It is lively, warm, and relieves boredom. From time to time, they can drink some wine, and they live a comfortable life, blocking the meager light of the winter sun with his hands. It took a while before Watson got used to it, and walked towards the tavern. What surprised him was that today's Oxford city was too quiet. Without the lively scenes of the past, people were hurrying and walking fast, which was very different from the past. Watson scratched his smooth and bright head in confusion, which made him uncomfortable. After walking for 10 minutes, Watson came to a tavern. He was familiar with the tavern, like other taverns, has an old-fashioned surface, with a flag of a large wine glass hanging on it, and two strong men standing at the door, like two sculptures. Without saying a word, when he came to the tavern, Watson found a surprising scene. The crowded scene of the tavern disappeared, and only 2 or 3 people were left, drinking rye and talking in low voices, as if they were afraid that others would find out. The doubts in Watson's heart became stronger and stronger, and a sense of oppression made him uncomfortable. "Boss, bring me a loaf of black bread, and a mug of rye wine." Watson walked to the wine cabinet and said loudly to the gentle-looking boss. This voice directly attracted the attention of everyone in the tavern, who swept him several times with astonished eyes, which made him puzzled, and then turned their attention to the young boss. "Little William, what's going on? What happened recently?" Holding a large loaf of bread as hard as a mallet on the counter, Watson leaned over and asked his young face, "Don't you know?" The young boss glanced at the old bachelor and asked suspiciously. Hearing the question, Watson quickly shook his head, his eyes widened, and his thin face trembled uncontrollably. "Yesterday, a group of people from London, wearing cloaks with red and white rose patterns and carrying swords, directly broke into the mansion of the John family, and brought Sir Brill John directly to Oxford." Seeing Watson's ignorant expression, little William threw himself on the counter, put his mouth close to the old bachelor's ear, and whispered, "You mean the well-known Sir John in Oxford?" Watson looked around and asked the young boss cautiously. "Yes, all of this is true." Little William nodded. "More than that, the heads of the Thomas family, the Owen family, and the Matthew family, which has become famous in recent years, were all brought directly by this group of Londoners. When we arrived in Oxford, I heard they were still being interrogated." "Then how dare they have such guts? They're all jazz," Watson said with emotion, his lips parted. "So what about Sir?" Little William smiled. "To His Majesty, these people are just ants under his feet. Dealing with them is a piece of cake." After saying this, Watson also had a look of agreement. "I heard that after conquering the northern barbarians, Scotland, Our Majesty the King has become more and more powerful. How can anyone in England dare to oppose him? So, for this group of people in London, Oxford City is a place of fear. I'm afraid that the young His Majesty the King will implicate the innocent and cause trouble to himself." Little William shook his head, pointed at the empty tavern, and said with a wry smile, "Unfortunately, it makes it difficult for me to do business." At this time, the mansion of Circuit Judge Felton John was occupied by Jack and others from London, and with them were the patriarchs from the 4 major families. "Speak, my dear Sir John, and struggle no more." Jack walked slowly in front of Brill John, his voice drifting unhurriedly in the room. What can I say? Take me to court." Brill looked calm, looked at the young man in front of him, and said lightly, without a trace of worry in his tone, "My sir, you know what I'm asking." Jack stopped, faced Sir Brill John, and said with a smile, "As for the court, don't worry, you won't be sent there. We don't worry about it." As Jack spoke, Brill's heartbeat suddenly accelerated, His expression was worried, and he stopped answering the call. Not sending him to court means that he is completely in the hands of the person in front of him, including his life. I'll go and see the situation of the others. Maybe their confessions have come out. Jack walked towards the door and said casually. Chapter 247 Special Operations Division. Jack walked quickly, without the slightest hesitation, towards the gate. Moving forward without hesitation, he held the doorknob with his left hand, and the door slowly opened. The light in the room became brighter and the air circulated a light. Wait a minute. Jack's body was already out of the room, and the door quickly began to close. At this time, a deep voice began to come from the room. Fortunately, his ears were not bad, otherwise it would have been difficult to hear clearly. A smile gradually appeared on Jack's face, and it became brighter and brighter, and his steps were slow. Sir John, your enlightenment really makes me very happy. At least it will save us a little time. Jack turned around, walked quickly across from Sir John, found a seat and sat down, putting his left leg on his right with a relaxed expression. Sir, I know you want to find evidence, and you have been burning with anxiety. If we stay here for 1 day, your pressure will increase by 1 level. For up to 3 days, we will be sent out respectfully by you. Exclamation mark. Sir John raised his head, looked directly at Jack, his eyes were calm, and he said in an unhurried voice, what I'm going to say next is what you desperately want to know. Sir John smiled indifferently, then sat up straight with a serious expression, as if he had important information to say. I only have one request. I hope you can treat me lightly. He emphasized the word I, and Jack recognized what he meant. Oh, this is indeed a simple matter, but it depends on whether you have enough information. After hearing what he said, Jack twitched a corner of his mouth, shook his head, his eyes drifted away, seemed to be thinking for a while, and then continued. Okay, I hope you will keep your promise. Sir John remained calm, but his eyes were a little dim. He understood that after this incident, his family would definitely decline, and if he didn't prepare in advance, it would be difficult to rise up. Dead friends are not dead poor, people are selfish. Besides, if he doesn't say it now, within 3 days, he won't believe the integrity of the other 3 people. It is the default law of people all over the world to act first to be strong, and to attack later to suffer. I'm in charge this time. I think I can still be the master of this matter. Jack corrected his attitude and said word by word, ready to accept this surprise moment. Our 4 major families are the main promoters, and the rest are just some small gentry in the county. Specifically, in the past 3 years, we have occupied a total of 13,000 acres of land in Oxfordshire, including 10,000 acres of arable land and 3,000 acres of grassland. Most of them have entered the hands of our 4 families. The specific ledger is in my study, the second book in the 3rd row. Just remove the cover. Then, Sir John slowly talked about the illegal land occupied in the past 3 years, that is, the land information that has not been reviewed by the Anti-Enclosure Committee, and Jack had already started to write records with a pen. These are the specific figures for the past 3 years, and the previous enclosures were basically approved by the Anti-Enclosure Committee, which means that taxes have been paid, and there is nothing to do without Jack. Jack knew about this, so he didn't disturb. Sir John's words reciprocated, and he naturally classified John Felton as an accidental death, easily reducing their guilt a lot. Of course, Edward knew about this. If Felton John was sentenced for corruption, at most he would be fined and dismissed from office, but how could such an act of prying the corner of the royal family be so forgiven? Death is his best result. Of 4 major families not only have to spit out the occupied land, but also punish the land or pounds equivalent to the occupied land, in order to comfort His Majesty the King's heart. Of course, the Judge title will naturally be revoked, and even the family members in the Security Committee will be persuaded to leave. These are just superficial. At most it will hurt some vitality of those families, and it will recover in a few years. Our Majesty the King naturally has the last resort. Naturally, he wouldn't make it easy for them. The king, who has read historical novels, still admires some of the methods of the Chinese emperor, and it is also very good to be able to use them in England. Keep it off. An hour passed quietly. Sir John also closed his lips, and Jack stopped recording with tired hands, and there was a sense of joy overflowing throughout. And Sir John slumped on the chair tiredly, his eyes dimmed, as if he was thinking about something. Thank you so much, sir. Jack stood up, took off his hat and saluted Sir John, with a sense of gratitude and irony. After turning around and leaving, Jack greeted the other interrogating members. After learning that there was nothing to gain, he picked up the things he had recorded, and proposed detailed task points and responsible teams. Soon, with the help of people from London, the Palace Intelligence Service now has 80 people in Oxford, and they all gathered in the lobby. These are the backbone of the Palace Intelligence Service. Everyone, get ready. After an hour, everyone except the left-behinds will execute the task on this paper immediately. Jack stood in the hall with a serious face, and he ordered loudly to everyone who had gathered. The others also nodded with serious faces. Without saying a word, an hour later, all of them were wearing white cloaks with red and white roses, daggers, slanted black flat hats to cover their specific faces, and gold-trimmed leather boots. Looking majestic, a group of people rode swiftly on their horses, and ran out of Oxford City at a speed like the wind, heading towards their goal. But some walked towards the wealthy district of Oxford City without haste. But Jack was sitting in Oxford City, thinking about whether this specific harvest could satisfy His Majesty the King. The winter sky is still so empty and vast, and it is refreshing to look at standing in front of the window, looking at the blue sky. As a member of the security committee, Right Wendell didn't feel happy at all, but became more and more upset. He was like a hedgehog, ready to explode at any time. Gross, restless. How can the news of the past few days make people happy? The 4 major families were arrested by a group of people who were said to be from London, and the sheriff and the county court did not dare to interfere, pretending not to see them, and letting them do whatever they wanted, which made him flustered, and the whole person neither can calm down at this time. There was a knock on the door, followed by the sound of the maid opening the door, and then there was a pushing sound, which made him feel even more irritable. Just as he turned around and was about to yell at him, suddenly 3 young men in white cloaks came over. "Hello, Mr. Right Wendell, we are the Special Operations Department of the Star Chamber Court, and now we need your cooperation." The leading man held up the wooden sign in his hand, engraved with the words Star Chamber Court and Special Operations Department in small characters. Chapter 248, The Arms Dealer Who Appeared Accidentally. What? Right Wendell was surprised. His voice was raised a lot. His eyes were wide open. "I haven't committed any crime. How could the Star Chamber Court summon me?" The leading man sneered smugly, twitched his face, shrugged, and said directly, "Mr. Wendell, you don't need to know too clearly about a matter of the Star Chamber Court. You just need to know that you have been summoned." The leading man put away the wooden sign in his hand, and said contemptuously with his tall stature. Seeing the stubborn and nervous expression on Wendell's face, the man's tone was full of disdain. "Don't try to struggle, and don't even think about running away. The Star Chamber Court obeys His Majesty's order. Follow me obediently." The originally dissatisfied expression on Wendell's face slowly turned into a decadent expression following his words. "I'll go with you." Wendell lost his energy for a moment and sighed. So, the lay family members and servants watched their male master being taken away by several men in white cloaks without any resistance, and they dared not stop him. Before Wendell went out, he turned around, leaving only a bitter smile on them. At this time, the whole of Oxfordshire was in a mess. There were more than 20 influential families in the county. Their patriarchs were taken away by a group of white cloaks, and conflicts even broke out. The circuit court also took away several trainee judges and judge assistants, which directly paralyzed the circuit court in Oxfordshire, and the accepted cases were temporarily suspended. The one with the greatest impact was the security committee. Of the 23 members, 13 were directly taken away, and the rest of the various committees were also taken away one after another. Within 3 days, more than 100 people were taken away throughout Oxfordshire. For a while, the entire Oxfordshire was in a panic, and everyone was in danger. Even the caravans from other places decreased a lot. As for the central government in London, impeachment letters from Oxford were sent like raindrops, which surprised the Speaker of the Privy Council, Ferris Alexander. This is a rare scene, and His Majesty the King also cooperated, and the Star Chamber Court urgently dispatched judges to go to the trial. They are professional in these matters. When the Star Chamber Court came and handed over the collected evidence, there would be no business for Jack and the others. The Palace Intelligence Service had no judicial power. Norwich City, England's second largest city, due to the occupation of the mob, the city's trade has suddenly shrunk a lot, and there are many more unemployed workers than before. However, the workers didn't care at all, because their troops won the battle and defeated the king's army. This made the panic-stricken people seem to have taken a reassurance, and their steps became much faster. As for being unemployed, isn't Sir Robert still supporting them? What are you worrying about? And the victorious insurgents also came back with smiles on their faces, discussing their heroic deeds loudly, with all kinds of dirty words and jokes one after another. At this moment, they felt that they were invincible while everyone else was celebrating and carnivaling. Only Sir Robert stayed in the meeting room alone, looking at the army's battle damage data in his hand. Sir Robert frowned. Instead of the joy of winning a battle, He felt a bit of bitterness of the 1,500 people soldiers. More than 300 people were captured, more than 600 people died, and nearly 500 escaped. For the king, it was a big defeat, a complete failure, and the Marquis William may have to suffer. The death of the young king is the winning side. The rebel army killed nearly 2,000 people and injured nearly 1,000 people, that is to say, the exchange ratio was 3 to 1. However, nearly 800 people were directly trampled to death and 500 people were injured in the disorderly stampede during the attack in this war. The casualties of the rebel army were close to 5,000, but only 600 militiamen were killed. Robert rubbed his brows. Even though he had prepared for such casualties, he still felt very uncomfortable. There are only 1,500 people. If the negotiation fails, the rebel army should follow you in the next siege. He has a headache, and the current military strength is still too weak, sir. A businessman who claims to be able to help us asks to meet you. Sir Robert, who was quietly thinking about the future, was sitting on a chair with layers of wrinkles on his face. At this moment, a young servant approached him softly and whispered in his ear, "Let him in." Narrowing his eyes, Robert said after thinking for a moment. He put away the paper on the table, sat upright, and his face became calm. "Dear Sir Kate, please forgive my presumptuous presentation. Please believe that meeting me will bring more good luck to your army." A middle-aged man with a dignified appearance came in, took off his hat, stroked his chest, and saluted. He was personable and elegant, as if he was a nobleman, which made Sir Robert feel a little doubtful. He raised his head. With a pale yellow beard on his face, he looked extremely kind, with a long face, which made people feel close at first sight. "Tell me, where are you from? What is the purpose of meeting me?" Robert's decades of experience, how can he be concealed by his complexion? His complexion tightened. He stood up, stared at him closely, and asked in a bad tone, "Haha. Sir, don't worry so much, you just need to know that I am here to help you." The middle-aged man continued with a smile on his face. Without caring, Robert stared at him carefully, choosing silence to deal with it, which was tantamount to acquiescing to his words. "Sir, this time, I brought you 2,000 long guns, 100 longbows, and 200 matchlock guns. So does this cost me anything?" Robert was very moved when he heard so many weapons, but asked calmly, "It only costs £2,000. Outside Norwich, these are all yours." The middle-aged man stretched out 2 fingers and said indisputably. Regarding this, Robert fell into deep thought. Such a price is not because it is too expensive, but because it is too cheap. In the encircled rebel army, there was no shortage of people, but too many weapons, and some even went to the battlefield with the wooden shovels. Such a price is basically the cost price, which is too unreasonable, and it feels like the world is falling apart. "I suppose, sir, you will not be short of pounds," the middle-aged man said with a smile, as if he had made up his mind. "Of course, there's no problem with the price. I'm just curious what your purpose is." "Forgive me, an old man, for my curiosity," Sir Robert asked softly, grinning. "Is this so important to you?" "As long as your army is strong, this is our purpose." "Wrong, sir. This is not my army. This is everyone's army." "Everyone's army," Robert immediately corrected his words and said seriously. Chapter 249 Trial. "I know, sir," the middle-aged businessman said indifferently, without any sincerity, and seemed to be perfunctory, but Sir Robert did not emphasize it any more when he saw this. "As for those weapons, we bought them." Sir Robert looked straight at them, with some indescribable meaning in his eyes, and said word by word, "Thank you for the weapon you brought. Please accept my thanks." Sir Robert bowed slightly and gave a knightly salute. The whole picture looked elegant and relaxed. "We have always admired your righteous behavior, and hope you can make it through." "This is our greatest hope." The middle-aged man also bowed politely, with a smile on his face and a sincere and enthusiastic tone. "Of course, if you can inflict severe damage on this tyrant and force them to agree to your terms, that would be the best thing." With a smile on the corner of the middle-aged businessman's mouth, he said something intentionally or unintentionally, but then he closed his mouth, saluted, and left quietly. When Sir Robert heard these words, his heart froze for a moment, and his original suspicion was infinitely magnified. This businessman is definitely not from England, either from France or from Spain. At present, it seems that the French are the most likely. However, for now, getting through the difficulties is the most important thing. Let's talk about the rest. Sir Robert exhaled lightly and held his forehead. He felt so tired now, and his energy was getting weaker and weaker. At this time, His Majesty the King of London also received the news from Oxford, and he couldn't help laughing when he heard that the people in Oxford were panicking. "Jack did a good job, very good, ha ha ha, In front of the bust of Secretary Emma, Edward read the letter from Oxford and laughed happily, and Emma was so happy to see His Majesty the King, she obediently stood aside and looked at His Majesty quietly, her eyes blurred. "Emma, you don't know that this boy Jack directly won more than 20 country gentry, and the evidence is solid. This time, I am afraid that most of the land in Oxfordshire will belong to the royal family. This is the most important thing I have received today. One thing to be happy about, the news of Marquis William's failure came in the morning. This guy, who couldn't support the wall with mud, rushed forward, underestimated the enemy, and lost all the militiamen in Northamptonshire. More importantly, he ignored his own words. This annoyed the always conceited His Majesty the King. If it wasn't for the face of the former Queen Catherine, he would have already directly waived his title, but now, Edward could only yell at him, emphasizing the order to besiege but not attack again, giving him a chance to make meritorious deeds. This is also a helpless move, and the situation that no one can use is once again placed in front of Edward at present. The Marquis William can only continue to be appointed. In the entire East England, only the Marquis William, who was once the Minister of the Regency Council, is qualified to command the militia in several counties. This aggrieved their motion was finally released after the letter from Oxford City. It is a delightful thing, my lord. Emma narrowed her eyes, cast her gentle eyes on Edward, and quickly echoed softly, "Okay, let's go out for a walk with me." Edward stood up, moved his stiff arms and neck, and said to the obedient Emma, "Is this true? My God, I've had enough of being here, Your Majesty. Where shall we go this time?" Emma's face brightened instantly. She stretched her delicate snow-white neck, and playfully embraced Edward's arm in her arms. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but her soft and somewhat hard bulk made Edward's arm completely sink, as if trapped in endless mud, unable to pull it out. In other words, he didn't want to take it out, and said with a hint of enjoyment, "Go to the theater. I think Henry VIII has been fully interpreted. Just let's go and enjoy it. This is my grandfather's story." Edward's right hand naturally wrapped around the girl's plump and tight waist. Even though his height was only as high as the girl's vivid eyes, he did not delay his actions at all. "Your Majesty." The girl was a little at a loss by His Majesty's sudden move. She turned her head to look at the domineering young king. With surprise flashing in her eyes and a nasal voice, she said tenderly, "Come on, I think it's going to be an enjoyable drama." "Sure." With a smile in his eyes, Edward met the girl's shy eyes and said meaningfully, "Soon." The two brought a few guards to the Rose Theatre without others knowing, sat in the VIP seat, sat on the leather-padded seat with the girl, and enjoyed the performance with relish. It's a pity that the girl didn't seem to be used to it. She seemed unwell, and the sound of vomiting could be heard from time to time, which made the guards outside the door very curious. While His Majesty the King was enjoying leisurely, a trial began in Oxford City. Judge of Star Chamber Court. Place of trial, County Court. Plaintiff, Jack, Director of Special Operations. Star Chamber Court. Defendants, the four major families including Parker Matthew, Brill John, and other country gentry and patriarchs. A total of 26 people. Jury, 23 impromptu. The jury, also known as the temporary civil jury, originated in the Roman period. In Henry II, that is, in the 12th century, the jury system was formally stipulated in the name of law, and it was generally accepted by the people. Of course, this is also the result of the British king's struggle for power with the nobles and the church, using public opinion to deal with theocracy. His Excellency, who has not yet formed the tradition of wearing a wig, has a bald head, a big eagle nose that looks red, and is sitting on the trial bench with a shiny face, which looks very funny, but everyone present didn't seem to be joking at all. As one of the most prominent judges in the Star Court, Sir Marlowe Christopher had a great reputation in England. In England's high society, he has always been known for being harsh and meticulous. Some people even say that he is the incarnation of Satan from hell. He imposed extremely severe sentences on every case he handled. Someone calculated that the probability of being sentenced to death by him was more than 30%. He was well known in England, and his fear was even greater than that of the king. First, the plaintiff's lawyer stood up, stated his point of view, and laid out the evidence one by one, showing it in front of the judge and jury, and explaining it carefully. The defendant also hired a lawyer to refute the plaintiff's allegations one by one, although the evidence seemed extremely pale. But this is the procedure that should exist. Even if the evidence of the crime is convincing, it is necessary to hire a lawyer for the plaintiff and argue. Then the plaintiff's lawyer refuted the loopholes in the defendant's lawyer's statement, but his tone was flat, as if he was being drafted. Chapter 250. Just get used to it. Then the defendant's lawyer feebly rebutted, and the defendant and plaintiff's lawyers rebutted a few times, which also allowed a jury to learn more about the details of the case. These families colluded with the circuit judge Felton John. Without going through the review of the anti-enclosure committee, they ran to enclose the land directly, and did not pay a penny of tax to His Majesty the King, so they were sued by His Majesty the King to the Star Room Court. The British are so strange. Respect for the law has reached a bone marrow, and maintaining the law has become the consensus of all. They despise anyone who breaks the law, even if he is a nobleman or a king later, in order to raise military expenses. A king agreed to the petition of rights submitted by the Parliament in exchange for military expenses. That is to say, the petition of rights has in fact become a legal provision. Then, he suddenly repented, and after that, he was sent to the guillotine. He was Charles I of the Stuart dynasty. Therefore, after learning that these people broke the law, the jurors began to abuse them, and the original sympathy became nothing at this time. The judge Marlowe Christopher, who was sitting on the trial table, waved a small hammer in his hand, directly stopping the jury from making noise. Gentlemen, be quiet, be quiet. He turned his gaze to Brill John and others who bowed their heads, and asked earnestly, do you have anything to complain about? No, none of us have anything to appeal. Brill and the others shook their heads together, and the defendant's lawyer replied directly, okay, the court is adjourned temporarily. Everyone wait a moment. His Excellency the judge glanced at the people present and announced loudly soon. Judge Marlowe Christopher was in the back room with other lawyers and assistant judges to confer. They didn't have to wait long before His Excellency came out and stood on the bench. Gentlemen, be quiet, I will announce the result of the trial. Marlowe Christopher's eyes were burning, and he scanned it seriously. Everyone. I hereby declare, Brill John, Parker Matthew and other 26 people were convicted of tax evasion, deceiving the king, colluding with officials, bribery, etc. After our negotiation, several crimes should be punished together, and the defendant needs to compensate the tax escaped by the royal family and confiscate all the landed annexed. Moreover, at the request of His Majesty the King, the John family, the Matthew family, the Owen family, and the Thomas family need to move to London within 1 month. Without the approval of His Majesty the King, the main members of the family are not allowed to leave the London area. The other 22 families were relocated to Ireland to serve the royal family. As soon as the judge's words fell, there was a sound of gasping in the courtroom, and surprised discussions erupted in the courtroom. One after another. Silence. Gentlemen, be quiet. His Excellency the judge slammed the wooden hammer on the table, barely stopping everyone's discussion, and even Jack, whose eyes had been wandering all the time, widened his eyes and his jaw was about to drop. He didn't expect that His Majesty the King would be punished by distribution. This is a big killing move, and the killing is frightening, Your Excellency. Why is there such a penalty as moving the family? I don't think there is such a penalty in all laws in England. Brill John suppressed the anger in his heart, held his breath, and questioned each word on behalf of others. The unwillingness inside could be seen by anyone like everyone else. An unbearable anger burned in his chest like a volcano about to erupt, and he was full of smiles. But Marlowe Christopher looked at the angry Brill John very calmly, as if looking at a piece of wood, and said calmly, with an unquestionable tone, this is the meaning of His Majesty the King. If you have any objections, you can go to London to discuss with His Majesty the King. You will be responsible for the specific consequences. One sentence from the king directly sent back what they said later. As for the true master of England, no one dared to challenge his authority, let alone question him face to face. Isn't this courting death? Seeing this, Yigan could only swallow the breath in his heart, lowered his angry head in dismay, and did not say another word. His Excellency the judge sneered in his heart. He had already expected such a situation. To trouble His Majesty the King was because he thought his life was too long. He hadn't seen it in decades. By the way, everyone, 1 month, only 1 month, I am waiting for your arrival in London. Under the sunlight, His Excellency's smooth head had a gleam of luster, like porcelain from the east, shining and transparent, and in the eyes of everyone, his sternness and cruelty became even more apparent after this taunting words. In London, in his territory, these people might be in trouble. As soon as the result came out, it was already evening, and Our Majesty the King had already enjoyed Henry VIII all afternoon, and walked out of the VIP seat contentedly, wrapped his arms around Emma's tight waist, and sat on the chair with ease, carriage holding Emma's waist with both hands. Edward buried his head in her firmness, rubbed gently, and sniffed his nose in the gully from time to time, feeling extremely happy. Emma, on the other hand, sat on the carriage a little stiffly, watching His Majesty's actions, a little shy, but also a little unspeakably happy for such a scene. Emma actually imagined it many times, and now she finally got what she wanted. And she felt unreal. The love for the king is not only because of the brainwashing in the orphan army, but because the identity of the king gives her a sense of security. 10 years of starvation has given her a great sense of insecurity. For example, Jack is greedy for power, but she yearns for the king's care. Only the status of a king can give her a sense of fulfillment. Emma, how do you feel? Edward sniffed the tempting aroma before his nose, raised his head, looked at the girl, and asked gently, Your Majesty, I just feel a little dry, and my throat is a little tired. The girl thought for a while, and expressed her feelings in detail, with a distressed expression on her face. It's nothing, just get used to it. This thing is very good for the human body, you will understand later. Edward stroked the girl's smooth face, touched some red and swollen lips, and comforted her. The young girl Yingayao knew something, but she didn't have her parents to teach her. She only knew it was embarrassing, but she could only do so at the request of His Majesty the King. Okay, I'll go back later, don't tell others, you can sleep in my study from now on. It's warm in winter and cool in summer, it's suitable for you girls to live in, it's very convenient. The pronunciation of the last sentence in Edward's family caused a shyness from the girl. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone, see you in the next video.